Hey there, lovely rated listeners. Welcome back to our podcast, powered by the wonderful people at JetOff, AI who help us spread love and laughter across the globe.
Today, we're super to dive into the fascinating world of Seychelles and Sudan, two countries that are as different as a tropical paradise and a desert oasis.
Ah, yes. And what a perfect way to introduce this topic than by sharing a funny story about our previous podcast recording. So, Leo, remember when you accidentally knocked over the coffee cup on your mic?
Oh man, how could I forget? I mean, it was a coffee-fueled catastrophe. But seriously, Mira, I was mortified. But you just laughed it off and said, well, that's a new kind of coffee flavor.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But anyway, enough about our coffee mishaps. We're here to help you decide which of these two countries is right for you. Whether you're a beach lover, an adventurer, or just looking for a new place to call home, we've got you covered.
That's right. And speaking of home, Mira, I have to say, your living room is starting to look like a mini museum with all the souvenirs you brought back from your travels. Do you have a secret stash of luggage space?
Oh, Leo, you know me too well. But seriously, our podcast today will be a comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions about Seychelles and Sudan. We'll cover everything from safety and economy to education, nightlife, and family-friendly activities.
That's right. And I have to say, I'm particularly about this topic because I've always been fascinated by the history and culture of these two countries. Did you know that Seychelles was a British colony, while Sudan was a British and Egyptian protectorate?
Wow, that's really interesting. Leo, and speaking of history, I have a fun fact to share. Did you know that the Seychelles archipelago is home to some of the oldest granitic islands on the planet?
Oh, that's mind-blowing. And I have to say, I'm a bit jealous that you get to travel to all these amazing places. But don't worry. Leo, I'll be right there with you in spirit, making fun of your silly jokes along the way.
Well, we're glad to have you as our partner in crime. And speaking of crime, we'll be discussing safety and security in both countries, so stay tuned for that.
That's right. And in the meantime, let's get started on our topic of the day one. Introduction to Seychelles and Sudan. So, Mira, why don't you kick us off with a brief introduction to these two countries?
I'm so to dive into the topic of general safety and crime rates in Seychelles and Sudan. Let's start with Seychelles. From what I gathered, the crime rate in Seychelles is relatively low compared to other African countries. In fact, it's often referred to as one of the safest countries in Africa.
But that's where the numbers get interesting. Mira, according to the latest crime statistics, Seychelles has a higher crime rate than some people think. Burglaries, theft, and petty crimes are on the rise, especially in major tourist areas. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that it's still a beautiful place to visit, but we need to be aware of these issues.
That's a great point, Leo. But let's look at the flip side. Seychelles has an excellent police force, and the government has implemented various initiatives to tackle crime. They've also invested in community policing, which has helped to build trust between the police and the community.
I completely agree. Mira, the police force in Seychelles is well trained and equipped to handle various types of crimes. However, I think it's essential to acknowledge that crime can still happen anywhere, even in the safest of places. And in Sudan, the situation is a bit more complex. The crime rate is higher, and there are more serious crimes like armed robbery and assault.
That's true. But Sudan has also made significant efforts to improve its safety record. The government has established a special task force to combat crime, and they've implemented stricter laws to punish offenders. And let's not forget the cultural aspect. Sudanese society is known for its strong sense of community and respect for authority.
But that's where the challenges come in. Mira, the cultural aspect can sometimes make it difficult for outsiders to understand the nuances of crime and safety in Sudan. For example, in some parts of Sudan, it's not uncommon for people to carry arms for protection. And in some cases, the police may not always be able to intervene due to cultural or religious sensitivities.
That's a great point. But I think it's also essential to acknowledge that Sudan has made significant progress in recent years. The government has implemented various programs to promote safety and security, and there are many examples of community-led initiatives that are making a real difference.
I agree. Mira, and let's not forget the resilience of the Sudanese people. Despite the challenges they face, they remain optimistic and hopeful for a better future. And I'm sure our listeners living in Sudan would agree that there's still much to be proud of.
Absolutely. Leo, and let's not forget the natural beauty of both countries. Seychelles and Sudan are home to some of the most stunning landscapes and wildlife in the world. It's a reminder that there's always hope and beauty to be found, even in the face of adversity.
Well said, Mira. And I think that's a great note to end on. If you have any thoughts or experiences related to general safety and crime rates in Seychelles or Sudan, please share them with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content on travel, culture, and safety. We'll be back with more topics and stories from around the world.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Until next time, stay safe and keep exploring.
I'm curious. Have you ever thought about the concept of a mini-state in a country like Seychelles? It's an archipelago with a relatively small population, but they've managed to maintain a stable government and peaceful society.
I see what you're getting at. Mira, Seychelles does have a unique blend of African, French, and British influences, which has helped shape its political landscape. And, as you mentioned, their mini-state setup has allowed them to maintain stability and social harmony.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Seychelles an interesting case study. Their government has prioritized development, education, and healthcare, which has contributed to their overall stability. Plus, their president, Ram, has been instrumental in promoting national unity.
That's a great point, Mira. And it's interesting to note that Seychelles has a relatively high Human Development Index score, which is a testament to their investment in education and healthcare. But let's contrast this with Sudan, which has a more complex political landscape.
Yes. Sudan has a long history of conflict, and their government has been criticized for its handling of human rights and democracy. It's worth noting that they've made progress in recent years, with the signing of the Juba peace agreement in 2020.
That's true, Mira. But, as we know, peace agreements are just the first step towards lasting stability. Sudan still faces many challenges, including economic instability and social unrest. And, as we've seen in other countries, it's not just about the government. It's also about the people's perception of justice and fairness.
Absolutely. Leo. And that's where social harmony comes in. In Seychelles, for example, they have a strong tradition of community-based initiatives, which helps to promote social cohesion. But in Sudan, social harmony is a more complex issue, given the country's history of conflict and division.
That's a good point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made progress in recent years. Seychelles has implemented policies to promote inclusive growth and reduce poverty, while Sudan has taken steps to address human rights abuses and promote democratic reforms.
Well, it's clear that both countries have their challenges, but also their opportunities for growth and development. And, as we've discussed, it's not just about the government. It's also about the people's role in promoting social harmony and stability.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think our listeners living in Seychelles or Sudan might think about this topic? Do you think they'd agree that social harmony is crucial for a country's stability?
That's a great question. Leo, I think our listeners would definitely agree that social harmony is essential for a country's stability. And, as we've discussed, it's not just about the government. It's also about the people's perception of justice and fairness.
Well, it's clear that both countries have a long way to go. but also a lot to learn from each other. And, as we've seen, social harmony is a key factor in promoting stability and peace.
And, as we always say, for more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jet Off AI for more in-depth analysis and expert opinions on global issues, to the economic conditions and cost of living in Seychelles. I've heard it's a great place to retire or even start a business. What are your thoughts on this, Leo?
Seychelles, a tropical paradise with a solid economy, driven by tourism, fishing, and the job market is relatively stable, with a mix of government, private, and international companies. But, as an expat, you'll need to consider the cost of living, which is relatively high compared to other African countries.
That's what I've heard. Seychelles has a reputation for being expensive, but it's worth it for the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters. Have you ever been to Seychelles, Leo?
Yes, I visited once, and it was breathtaking. But, let's get back to the cost of living. Seychelles has a relatively high tax rate, and the cost of housing, food, and transportation is quite high. However, the standard of living is also high, with good infrastructure and amenities.
I see what you mean. The cost of living in Seychelles can be quite steep, but it's worth it for the quality of life. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. They must have some tips on how to make the most of their budget.
Absolutely. And speaking of budgeting, let's compare Seychelles to Sudan. Sudan has a different economic landscape, with a growing oil industry and a relatively low cost of living. But, as an expat, you'll need to consider the economic instability and the impact of the US dollar fluctuations on the local currency.
That's a great point. Leah, Sudan has a lot of potential, but it's not without its challenges. I've heard that the cost of living in Sudan can be quite low, but the infrastructure and amenities are not as developed as in Seychelles.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the safety concerns in Sudan. As an expat, you'll need to be aware of the local situation and take necessary precautions.
I agree. Safety is a top priority for anyone considering moving to Sudan. But, on the other hand, the cost of living in Sudan can be quite low, making it an attractive option for some expats.
That's true. And speaking of costs, have you heard about the Sudanese pound versus the US dollar? It's a bit of a challenge for expats to navigate, but with the right guidance, it can be manageable.
Yes, I've heard about that. It's a bit of a currency puzzle, but I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Can you explain it in more detail, Leah?
Of course. The Sudanese pound has been subject to significant fluctuations, making it challenging for expats to manage their finances. But, with the right planning and advice, it's possible to navigate the currency market and make the most of your budget.
I see. And speaking of planning, what advice would you give to our listeners who are considering moving to either Seychelles or Sudan?
That's a great question. Nia, my advice would be to research thoroughly, consider the cost of living, and plan carefully. It's also essential to stay informed about the local situation and be aware of the economic and safety concerns.
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and to our listeners, I'd like to ask if you have any tips or advice on how to make the most of your budget in Seychelles or Sudan. Please share them with us in the comments.
Absolutely. And let's not forget to mention the cultural differences between the two countries. Seychelles has a more developed tourism industry, while Sudan has a rich cultural heritage and a growing economy.
That's a great point. Leo, and speaking of culture, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the local customs and traditions in both countries.
Of course. And finally, let's compare the two countries in terms of economic growth. So I think that we can cover that. Seychelles has a relatively stable economy, while Sudan is experiencing rapid growth, driven by the oil industry.
That's fascinating. Leo, and to our listeners, I'd like to ask, what do you think about the economic growth in both countries? Do you think it's a good time to invest in either country?
That's a great question. Mira, And let's wrap up this topic by saying that both Seychelles and Sudan have their unique economic conditions and cost of living. As expats, it's essential to research thoroughly and plan carefully to make the most of your budget and lifestyle.
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this topic. We hope you found it informative and helpful. So, when it comes to accommodation options and quality in Seychelles, expats can expect a wide range of choices, from luxurious villas to cozy beach bungalows. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to wake up to those crystal clear waters and powdery whites and beaches every day?
That's right. Mira, Seychelles has a reputation for being one of the most beautiful island nations in the world, and the accommodation options reflect that. From 5-star resorts to self-catering apartments, there's something for every budget and preference.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever stayed in one of those luxurious villas I mentioned earlier? I mean, can you imagine having your own private pool and beach?
Well, Mira, I have to admit, I've stayed in some pretty nice places in my time, but I'm not sure I've ever had a private pool and beach all to myself. But hey, a guy can dream, right?
Exactly. And speaking of dreams, I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the island's unique blend of French and African cultures makes it a truly special place to call home.
That's absolutely right. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has a strong focus on sustainability and ecotourism, which is great for both the environment and the local community.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the emphasis on sustainability is a major selling point for expats looking to move to Seychelles?
Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that our listeners are a pretty eco-conscious bunch. But seriously, it's great to see a country like Seychelles prioritizing the environment and community development.
Exactly. And now, let's move on to Sudan. I'm sure our listeners are curious about the accommodation options and quality in this beautiful country.
That's right. Mira, Sudan is a fascinating country with a rich history and culture. And when it comes to accommodation, there's a wide range of options available, from traditional mud brick houses to modern apartments in cities like Khartoum.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Sudan would agree with me that the country's unique cultural heritage is a major draw for expats.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that Sudan has a long history of welcoming foreign visitors and expats, which makes it a great destination for anyone looking to experience a new culture.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever stayed in one of those traditional mud brick houses I mentioned earlier? I mean, can you imagine living in a house that's been around for centuries?
Well, Mira, I think I'll stick to my modern apartment in Khartoum, but I can appreciate the charm of a traditional mud brick house.
Fair enough. Leo, and speaking of charm, I think it's worth noting that Sudan's capital city, Khartoum, has a lot to offer in terms of accommodation options and quality.
That's right. Mira, Khartoum is a vibrant and bustling city with a wide range of accommodation options available, from budget-friendly guest houses to luxury hotels.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the accommodation options in Khartoum. Do you think they're up to par with those in other major cities in Africa?
Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that our listeners are a pretty well-traveled bunch. But seriously, Khartoum has a lot to offer in terms of accommodation, and I think it's definitely worth considering for anyone looking to move to Sudan.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about the cost of accommodation in both Seychelles and Sudan. I'm sure our listeners are curious about the prices and what they can expect to pay for a place to stay.
That's right. Mira, the cost of accommodation can vary widely depending on the location, type of accommodation, and other factors. But, generally speaking, both Seychelles and Sudan offer a range of options to suit different budgets and preferences.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever had to deal with a difficult landlord or property manager? I mean, can you imagine having to navigate the bureaucracy of renting a place in a foreign country?
Well, Mira, I think I've had my fair share of dealing with difficult landlords. But I've always managed to find a way to resolve the issue amicably. And I'm sure our listeners have had similar experiences.
Exactly. And that's all for our discussion on accommodation options and quality in Seychelles and Sudan. We hope our listeners found this information helpful and informative.
That's right, Mira. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us in the comments section below. We love to hear from you.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more podcasts and content and travel, culture, and lifestyle. Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, I'm sure our listeners are curious about the visa and immigration process in Seychelles. So, let's dive right in. From what I've researched, Seychelles has a relatively straightforward process, especially for EU citizens. They can enter the country without a visa and then apply for a residence permit. Leo, what about Sudan? I've heard that process is a bit more complex.
Yes, Sudan. Well, Mira, you're right that the process can be a bit more involved. But, you see, it's not all bad news. Sudan has a unique approach to immigration, with a focus on economic development. They've introduced a new visa system that's designed to attract investors and entrepreneurs. It's actually quite appealing, if I do say so myself.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about this new visa system. Can you tell us more about it? And what about the residence permit process in Seychelles? I've heard it can take a few months to get everything sorted out.
Yes. The residence permit process in Seychelles. Well, Mira, it's true that it can take a few months, but it's definitely worth it. Once you have your residence permit, you'll have access to all the benefits of living in Seychelles, including free healthcare and education. And, of course, the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters don't hurt either.
I'm sure they don't. But, seriously, Leo, what about the paperwork and bureaucracy involved in getting a residence permit in Seychelles? I've heard it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Yes, the paperwork. Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that bureaucracy is a universal language, and Sudan is no exception. But, in all seriousness, the process can be a bit daunting, but it's definitely doable. And, as I said, the benefits of living in Sudan are definitely worth it.
I see what you mean, Leo, but I'm still a bit concerned about the complexity of the process. Can you tell us more about the different types of visas available in Sudan? And how they work?
Yes. The visas. Well, Mira, Sudan has a range of visas available, including tourist visas, business visas, and residence visas. And, as I mentioned earlier, they've also introduced a new investor visa that's designed to attract foreign investment. It's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors to take advantage of Sudan's growing economy.
That sounds interesting, Leo. But what about the residence permit process in Seychelles? I've heard it can be a bit tricky to get everything sorted out.
Yes. The residence permit process in Seychelles. Well, Mira, I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has a relatively straightforward process, and the authorities are generally quite helpful. Of course, there are always exceptions, but overall, it's a relatively smooth process.
I see what you mean, Leo, but I'm still a bit concerned about the bureaucracy involved. Can you tell us more about the different types of permits available in Seychelles and how they work?
Yes, the permits. Well, Mira, Seychelles has a range of permits available, including residence permits, work permits, and study permits. And, as I mentioned earlier, the authorities are generally quite helpful in guiding you through the process.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cost of living in Seychelles and Sudan. Can you tell us more about that, Leo?
Yes. The cost of living. Well, Mira, both Seychelles and Sudan have a relatively low cost of living, especially compared to other countries in the region. Of course, there are always variations depending on where you live and what your lifestyle is like. But overall, both countries are quite affordable.
That's great to hear, Leo. But What about the language requirements for expats in Seychelles and Sudan? I've heard that English is widely spoken in both countries. But are there any other languages that expats should be aware of?
Ah, yes. The language requirements. Well, Mira, English is indeed widely spoken in both Seychelles and Sudan. But it's always a good idea to learn a few basic phrases in the local language, just to show respect and appreciation for the culture. In Seychelles, the official language is Creole, while in Sudan, Arabic is the official language.
I see what you mean, Leo. But what about the healthcare system in Seychelles and Sudan? I've heard that both countries have good healthcare systems, but are there any specific requirements or considerations that expats should be aware of?
Ah, yes. The healthcare system. Well, Mira, both Seychelles and Sudan have good healthcare systems. But it's always a good idea to have some basic knowledge of the system and what to expect. In Seychelles, the healthcare system is generally quite modern and well-equipped, while in Sudan, the healthcare system is a bit more challenging, but still accessible.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the tax implications of living in Seychelles and Sudan. Can you tell us more about that? Leo?
Ah, yes. The tax implications. Well, Mira, both Seychelles and Sudan have a relatively straightforward tax system, and expats are generally not subject to taxation on their foreign earned income. However, it's always a good idea to consult with a tax professional to ensure that you're in compliance with all relevant tax laws and regulations.
I see what you mean, Leo. But what about the residency requirements for expats in Seychelles and Sudan? I've heard that both countries have specific requirements for residency, but are there any variations depending on the type of visa or permit you have?
Yes. The residency requirements. Well, Mira, both Seychelles and Sudan have specific requirements for residency, but they can vary depending on the type of visa or permit you have. For example, if you have a residence permit in Seychelles, you'll be required to spend a certain amount of time in the country each year, while in Sudan, the requirements can be a bit more complex.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the education system in Seychelles and Sudan. Can you tell us more about that? Leo?
Ah, yes. The education system. Well, Mira, both Seychelles and Sudan have a relatively well-developed education system, with a range of options available for expat children. In Seychelles, the education system is generally quite modern and well-equipped, while in Sudan, the education system is a bit more challenging, but still accessible.
I see what you mean, Leo. But what about the social aspects of living in Seychelles? I'm to dive into the healthcare systems of Seychelles and Sudan, and I'm sure our listeners will find this comparison fascinating. So, let's start with Seychelles, which boasts a well-organized and modern healthcare system. They have a relatively high doctor-to-patient ratio, with many medical professionals having received training abroad.
That's impressive. Mira, Seychelles has indeed invested heavily in its healthcare infrastructure. But I'm curious, what about Sudan? How does their healthcare system compare? I've heard that Sudan has been working to improve its healthcare services, especially in rural areas.
Great point. Leo, Sudan has been making strides in improving its healthcare system, but it still faces significant challenges, particularly in terms of infrastructure and resources. However, they have introduced a new health insurance scheme, which has helped increase access to healthcare for many citizens.
I see. And I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what about the quality of care in Seychelles? Is it on par with what they're used to in their home countries? I've heard that Seychelles has a high standard of care, with many hospitals and clinics equipped with modern facilities.
Yes, that's true. Leo, Seychelles has a well-developed healthcare system, with many hospitals and clinics that offer high-quality care. In fact, the country has a reputation for having some of the best hospitals in Africa. But I'm curious, what about the cost of healthcare in Seychelles? Is it affordable for expats and locals alike?
Ah, good question. Mira, Seychelles has a relatively high cost of living, which includes healthcare costs. However, the government has introduced measures to make healthcare more affordable for locals, and many hospitals and clinics offer sliding scale fees for expats and foreigners.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does the cost of healthcare compare? I've heard that Sudan has a relatively low cost of living, but healthcare costs can be high, especially in urban areas.
That's correct. Mira, Sudan has a relatively low cost of living, but healthcare costs can be high, especially in urban areas like Khartoum. However, the government has introduced measures to make healthcare more affordable, and many hospitals and clinics offer low-cost services for locals.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in Seychelles or Sudan, please share your experiences with us. Do you think the healthcare systems in these countries are adequate? Or are there areas that need improvement?
Ah, great point. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your candid questions. Let's continue to explore the healthcare systems in Seychelles and Sudan, and see how they compare.
Okay, so let's talk about the cultural nuances of healthcare in these countries. In Seychelles, for example, there's a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and holistic approaches to healthcare. Many locals prefer to seek treatment from traditional healers or herbalists.
That's fascinating. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will find this interesting. In Sudan, on the other hand, there's a strong emphasis on modern medicine and Western-style healthcare. Many locals prefer to seek treatment from Western-trained doctors and hospitals.
Ah, yes. And I think this reflects the cultural differences between the two countries. Seychelles has a more relaxed and laid-back attitude towards healthcare, while Sudan has a more formal and structured approach.
I see what you mean, Mira, and I think this is reflected in the way healthcare is organized and delivered in each country. Seychelles has a more decentralized healthcare system, with many small clinics and hospitals scattered throughout the islands.
Ah, yes. And Sudan has a more centralized healthcare system, with many large hospitals and clinics concentrated in urban areas. But I'm curious, what about the patient experience in Seychelles? How do locals and expats rate the quality of care?
Ah, good question. Mira, Seychelles has a reputation for having some of the friendliest and most welcoming healthcare professionals in Africa. Many locals and expats have reported positive experiences with the healthcare system in Seychelles.
I see. And what about Sudan? How do locals and expats rate the quality of care? I've heard that Sudan has a reputation for having some of the best healthcare professionals in Africa.
Oh, yes. Sudan has a reputation for having some of the best healthcare professionals in Africa, and many locals and expats have reported positive experiences with the healthcare system in Sudan.
Okay, so let's summarize what we've discussed so far. Seychelles has a well-organized and modern healthcare system, with many hospitals and clinics equipped with modern facilities. Sudan, on the other hand, has a more decentralized healthcare system, with many small clinics and hospitals scattered throughout the country.
Ah, yes, and I think that's a great summary. Mira, Seychelles has a reputation for having some of the best healthcare professionals in Africa, while Sudan has a reputation for having some of the best healthcare professionals in Africa as well.
Ah, yes, and I think that's a great point. Leo, both Seychelles and Sudan have a lot to offer when it comes to healthcare, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this comparison.
Ah, I agree. Mira, and I think that's a great way to wrap up our discussion on healthcare in Seychelles and Sudan. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences with us. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this informative and engaging conversation.
So when it comes to transportation infrastructure, Seychelles and Sudan are quite different. Seychelles has a well-developed transportation network with a focus on public transit, while Sudan's infrastructure is still developing.
That's right. Mira, Seychelles has a comprehensive public transportation system, with buses and taxis connecting the islands. In contrast, Sudan's transportation network is mostly limited to private vehicles and taxis.
I was to see that Seychelles has a relatively low number of private vehicles per capita, which is great for the environment. But in Sudan, private vehicles are the norm, and traffic congestion is a major issue.
Exactly. And it's not just the number of vehicles, but also the condition of the roads. Seychelles has invested heavily in maintaining its roads, while Sudan's roads are often rough and poorly maintained.
I bet our listeners in Seychelles can relate to the importance of well-maintained roads. And what about public transportation? How does it work in both countries?
Well, in Seychelles, public transportation is relatively efficient, with buses and taxis running frequently. In Sudan, however, public transportation is limited, and many people rely on private vehicles or taxis.
That's a shame, because public transportation can be such a great way to get around a city. And what about road safety? Are there any particular concerns in both countries?
Actually, Seychelles has a relatively low road fatality rate compared to other countries. In Sudan, however, road safety is a major concern, with many accidents occurring due to poor road conditions and reckless driving.
That's alarming. I bet our listeners in Sudan can relate to the importance of road safety. And what about transportation options for tourists? Are there any unique experiences in both countries?
Well, in Seychelles, tourists can enjoy scenic boat tours and ferry rides between the islands. In Sudan, tourists can take a traditional falaka ride along the Nile River.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And what about the cost of transportation? Are there any differences between the two countries?
Actually, Seychelles has a relatively high cost of transportation due to its remote location and limited transportation options. In Sudan, however, transportation costs are relatively low.
That's interesting. I bet our listeners in Sudan can relate to the importance of affordable transportation. And what about transportation, planning and policy? Are there any initiatives in both countries to improve transportation infrastructure?
Well, Seychelles has a well-planned transportation system with a focus on sustainability and environmental protection. In Sudan, however, transportation planning is still in its early stages, with a focus on improving road infrastructure.
That's great to hear. Leo, and what about the role of technology in transportation? Are there any innovative solutions in both countries?
Actually, Seychelles has implemented a range of technological solutions to improve transportation, including a public transportation app and a bike-sharing system. In Sudan, however, technology is still being developed to improve transportation infrastructure.
Well, that's impressive. I bet our listeners can relate to the importance of technology in transportation. And finally, what advice would you give to travelers visiting both countries?
Well, in Seychelles, I would recommend taking a scenic boat tour or ferry ride to enjoy the beautiful islands. In Sudan, I would recommend taking a traditional falaka ride along the Nile River to experience the local culture.
Ah, that sounds like a great way to experience both countries. And what about our listeners? What are your thoughts on transportation infrastructure and convenience in Seychelles and Sudan?
I think it's clear that both countries have their unique transportation challenges and opportunities. Seychelles has a well-developed transportation network, while Sudan is still developing its infrastructure.
That's a great summary. Leo, and finally, what's the most important thing to remember when traveling in both countries?
I think the most important thing is to be patient and flexible, especially in Sudan where transportation options can be limited.
That's great advice. And what about our listeners? Do you have any tips for traveling in Seychelles and Sudan? Tai, let's dive into the world of language barriers and ease of communication in Seychelles and Sudan. Both countries are incredibly unique, and I'm to share some insights with you.
That's right. Mira, from the beautiful Creole dialects of Seychelles to the rich Arabic and Nubian languages of Sudan, we'll explore the linguistic landscapes of these two fascinating countries.
I'm curious. Leo, have you had any personal experiences with language barriers in Seychelles or Sudan? There are some funny stories to share.
Ah, yes. When I was in Seychelles, I tried to order a plate of fresh seafood, but I ended up saying something completely different. The waiter looked at me confused, and I was like, "Ugh, I meant to say that."
Oh my goodness. That's hilarious. I'm sure our listeners can relate to situations like that. In Seychelles, the official language is Creole, but English and French are also widely spoken. How do you think that affects communication?
Well, Mira, I think it's wonderful that Seychelles has a mix of languages. It's like a melting pot of cultures. But sometimes, it can be confusing, especially for tourists who don't speak Creole.
That's a great point. Leo, and speaking of tourists, have you ever tried to communicate with locals in Sudan? I've heard that Arabic is the main language spoken there.
Yes. Arabic is indeed the main language in Sudan. But many people also speak English, especially in the tourist areas. However, I found that non-Arabic speakers can still navigate everyday life with a little effort and patience.
I completely agree, Leo. And it's interesting to note that Sudan has a rich cultural heritage, with many ancient languages and dialects still spoken today. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Mira, Sudan has a fascinating history. And its languages reflect that, from the ancient Nubian languages to the modern Arabic dialects. There's a wealth of linguistic diversity to explore.
I'm sure our listeners are curious about how to communicate effectively in Seychelles and Sudan. Do you have any tips for expats or travelers who want to navigate language barriers?
Well, Mira, I think the key is to be respectful and patient. Learn a few basic phrases in the local language. And don't be afraid to ask for help. And of course, always carry a translation app or phrasebook with you.
That's great advice. Leo, and speaking of translation apps, I've heard that some apps can even translate languages in real time. That's amazing technology.
Oh, yes. It's incredible what technology can do. But I still think there's no substitute for learning a few basic phrases and interacting with locals in person.
I completely agree, Leo. And I think that's especially true for Seychelles and Sudan, where the local culture is so rich and vibrant. If you're planning a trip to either country, I highly recommend immersing yourself in the local language and customs.
Absolutely. Mira. And who knows, you might even pick up a few words of Creole or Arabic along the way.
Well, I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about Seychelles and Sudan. Do you have any final thoughts on language barriers and communication?
Well, Mira, I think the most important thing is to approach language barriers with an open mind and a sense of humor. And of course, always be respectful and patient.
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your insights. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on language barriers and communication in Seychelles and Sudan.
Thank you. Mira, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about these fascinating countries.
So let's dive into the cultural diversity and tolerance in Seychelles and Sudan, and to share some fascinating insights with you all. Have you guys ever heard of the Seychelles motto? Unity and diversity. It's a beautiful concept, don't you think? Leo?
Yes, I love it. And it's amazing to see how Seychelles embodies this motto, with over 90% of the population being of African descent, but also having a significant Creole and European influence. It's a melting pot of cultures. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that it's a unique blend of traditions and customs.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating is that Seychelles has made a conscious effort to preserve its cultural heritage. They have a rich tradition of storytelling, music, and dance, which is still very much alive today. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever had the chance to experience any of these traditional performances?
Actually, yes. During my last trip to Seychelles, I had the opportunity to attend a traditional Creole dance performance. It was incredible. The energy, the music, the costumes, it was all so vibrant and alive. And what struck me was how the dancers seemed to be telling a story through their movements, almost like a form of storytelling.
That's amazing. I've heard that Sudan, on the other hand, has a much more complex cultural landscape, with over 500 ethnic groups. It's a true melting pot of cultures. But I've also heard that Sudan has struggled with issues of tolerance and social cohesion in the past. What are your thoughts on this, Leo?
Ah, yes. Sudan is indeed a complex country. But what I find interesting is that, despite these challenges, Sudanese culture is still incredibly rich and diverse. From the vibrant markets of Khartoum to the traditional villages of Darfur, there's so much to explore and learn. And I think it's this diversity that makes Sudan such a fascinating country to visit.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that Sudan has a strong tradition of hospitality and generosity. I've heard that when guests arrive in Sudan, they're often greeted with a warm welcome and a traditional meal. Can you imagine, Leo, arriving in Sudan and being greeted with a plate of delicious Isra and FUL?
Oh, yes. I can almost smell it now. And, it's funny. But I think that's one of the things that makes Sudan such a welcoming country. The people are so warm and friendly, and they're always eager to share their culture and traditions with visitors.
That's so true. And I think it's also worth noting that both Seychelles and Sudan have a strong sense of community and social cohesion. Despite their differences, both countries seem to value the importance of coming together and celebrating their cultural diversity. I'm curious, Leo, do you think this is something that we can learn from in the West?
Ah, absolutely. I think. In the West, we often get caught up in our own individualism and forget the importance of community and social cohesion. But in countries like Seychelles and Sudan, they seem to have a much deeper understanding of the value of coming together and celebrating their differences. And I think that's something that we can definitely learn from.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about the cultural diversity and tolerance in Seychelles and Sudan. And I'm curious, do you think that our listeners have any thoughts or insights to share on this topic? Please, let us know in the comments below.
And before we go, I just want to say that I'm really grateful for this conversation. Mira, it's been so enlightening to explore the cultural diversity and tolerance in these two countries. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get to visit Sudan and experience it all for ourselves.
Ah, yes, that would be amazing. And I think that's a great way to end this conversation. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. So, Seychelles and Sudan, two countries with unique educational landscapes. Let's dive into the literacy rates. Seychelles boasts a remarkable 95% literacy rate, while Sudan's literacy rate is around 73%. That's a significant difference.
Ah, yes. It's fascinating to see how literacy rates can vary between countries. I'm curious. Mira, what do you think contributes to Seychelles' high literacy rate?
Well, Leo, Seychelles has a strong emphasis on education, and it's free for all citizens. They also have a well-structured curriculum that focuses on critical and problem-solving skills. Plus, the country has a relatively small population, making it easier to implement effective education policies.
That's a great point. Mira, and what about Sudan? What challenges might they face in terms of literacy rates?
Sudan has a more complex situation. They have a large population, and education is not as widely available. Additionally, there are cultural and linguistic barriers that can affect literacy rates. But, Leo, I'm sure you're aware that Sudan has made significant progress in recent years, and their literacy rate is improving.
Yes, that's true. And it's great to see progress being made. But, Mira, it's kind of like a thing. What about language schools in Seychelles? How do they support language acquisition?
Oh, excellent question. Leo, Seychelles has a range of language schools that cater to different needs. They offer courses in English and Creole, which is the official language of the country. Plus, many schools have exchange programs with international institutions. which helps students learn about different cultures and languages.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And what about Sudan? Do they have similar language schools?
Actually, Leo, Sudan has a more limited range of language schools, but they do offer courses in Arabic and English. However, many students in Sudan learn English as a second language through informal means, such as online courses or private tutors.
I see. And what about the curriculum in Seychelles? Is it more focused on language acquisition?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has a curriculum that emphasizes language skills, particularly in English and French. They also offer courses in Creole, which is the local language. Plus, many schools have a strong focus on language arts, which includes reading, writing, and speaking.
That's great to hear. Mira, and what about Sudan? What's the curriculum like?
Sudan's curriculum is more focused on Arabic and Islamic studies, with some courses in English and science. There is a growing interest in language acquisition, particularly in English, as it's becoming more important for economic and cultural exchange.
I see. And what about the role of technology in language acquisition in both countries?
Technology plays a significant role in both countries. Leo, Seychelles has made significant investments in e-learning platforms on digital resources, which helps students learn languages more effectively. In Sudan, there is also a growing interest in using technology to support language acquisition, particularly through online courses and language learning apps.
Wow, that's fascinating. And what about student testimonials? Have you come across any interesting stories about language acquisition in Seychelles or Sudan?
Yes. I've spoken to several students who have benefited from language acquisition programs in Seychelles. They say that the courses have helped them develop a stronger sense of confidence and self-expression. In Sudan, I've also spoken to students who have learned English through informal means, and they say that it's helped them access more job opportunities and connect with people from different cultures.
That's great to hear. Mira, and what about the role of parents and community in supporting language acquisition in both countries?
Parents and community play a vital role in supporting language acquisition in both countries. Leo, in Seychelles, many parents encourage their children to learn languages, particularly English and French, as it's seen as a key to better job prospects and cultural exchange. In Sudan, there is also a strong emphasis on community involvement in language acquisition, particularly through informal language exchange programs and cultural events.
I see. And what about the challenges facing language acquisition in both countries?
Yes. Both countries face challenges in terms of language acquisition. Leo, Seychelles has a shortage of qualified language teachers, particularly in Creole, which is the local language. In Sudan, there is a lack of resources and infrastructure to support language acquisition, particularly in rural areas.
I understand. And what about the opportunities for language acquisition in both countries?
Opportunities abound in both countries. Leo, Seychelles has a growing demand for language teachers and language-related jobs, particularly in the tourism and education sectors. In Sudan, there is a growing interest in language acquisition, particularly in English, as it's becoming more important for economic and cultural exchange.
Well, that's fascinating. And what about the role of language in bridging cultural divides in both countries?
Language plays a vital role in bridging cultural divides in both countries. Leo, in Seychelles, language has helped to unite the country's diverse population, particularly through the use of Creole. In Sudan, language has also played a significant role in bridging cultural divides, particularly through the use of Arabic and English.
I see. And what about the impact of language acquisition on economic development in both countries?
Language acquisition has a significant impact on economic development in both countries. Leo, in Seychelles, language skills are essential for the tourism and education sectors, which are key drivers of the economy. In Sudan, language skills are also essential for economic development, particularly in the oil and gas sectors.
Wow, that's fascinating. And what about the future of language acquisition in both countries?
Ah, the future looks bright for language acquisition in both countries. Leo, Seychelles is investing heavily in language education and technology, which will help to improve language acquisition rates. In Sudan, there is a growing interest in language acquisition, particularly in English, which will help to support economic and cultural exchange.
I see. And what about the role of language in promoting cultural diversity in both countries?
Language plays a vital role in promoting cultural diversity in both countries. Leo, in Seychelles, language has helped to preserve the country's rich cultural heritage, particularly through the use of Creole. In Sudan, language has also played a significant role in promoting cultural diversity, particularly through the use of Arabic and English.
I see. And what about the impact of language acquisition on social mobility in both countries?
Oh, language acquisition has a significant impact on social mobility in both countries. Leo, in Seychelles, language skills are essential for social mobility, particularly for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. In Sudan, language skills are also essential for social mobility, particularly for students who want to access better job opportunities.
Wow, that's fascinating. And what about the role of language?
So, let's talk about climate and seasonal conditions in Seychelles. I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters of this island nation. But have you ever wondered what the climate is like in Seychelles? It's a tropical paradise, but don't let that fool you. The temperature can get quite hot and humid, especially during the summer months.
Ah, yes. The heat and humidity can be quite oppressive, especially in the summer. But Seychelles is also known for its unique climate phenomena, the Indian Ocean Dipole. It's a weather pattern that brings warm, moist air from the Indian Ocean, which can lead to heavy rainfall and flooding. I'm curious, Mira, have you ever experienced any of these extreme weather events during your travels?
Actually, I have. During my visit to Seychelles, I experienced a sudden downpour that was so intense, I had to take shelter under a nearby awning. But the locals told me that it's not uncommon for the island to experience heavy rainfall and flooding during the summer months. And speaking of summer, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the best time to visit Seychelles.
Ah, yes. The summer months are definitely the best time to visit Seychelles, especially if you're looking for warm weather and beach activities. But if you're looking for a more relaxed atmosphere and lower prices, the shoulder season, which is from April to May and September to November, is a great time to visit. And let's not forget about the unique cultural festivals that take place in Seychelles, like the Seychelles International Carnival.
Oh, yes. The Seychelles International Carnival is a must-see event. It's a vibrant celebration of music, dance, and culture that showcases the island's rich heritage. And speaking of heritage, I'm curious. Leah, have you ever learned about the unique adaptations that the people of Seychelles have developed to cope with the island's climate?
Ah, yes. The people of Seychelles have developed some amazing adaptations to cope with the island's climate. For example, they use traditional techniques like Malloy music and dance to express themselves and cope with the stress of living in a hot and humid climate. And let's not forget about the delicious Creole cuisine that's been influenced by the island's African, European, and Asian heritage.
Yes. The Creole cuisine is definitely one of the highlights of Seychelles. And speaking of cuisine, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique food traditions of Seychelles. Can you tell us, Leah, about some of the popular dishes that are typical of Seychelles?
Yes. The Creole cuisine is a fusion of different culinary traditions, and it's absolutely delicious. Some of the popular dishes include boulet de pommes, which is a type of pancake made with bananas and spices, and poulet fricassee, which is a type of chicken stew made with a variety of spices and herbs. And let's not forget about the fresh seafood that's available in Seychelles. It's absolutely divine.
Uh, yes. The seafood in Seychelles is definitely a highlight of the island's cuisine. And speaking of seafood, I'm curious, Leo, have you ever heard about the unique fishing traditions of Seychelles?
Ah, yes. The fishing traditions of Seychelles are indeed unique. The islanders have developed a traditional fishing method called fishing in the sea, which involves using traditional fishing nets and hooks to catch fish. And let's not forget about the beautiful coral reefs that surround the island, which provide a home for a variety of marine life.
Yes. The coral reefs of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's marine ecosystem. And speaking of marine ecosystems, I'm curious, Leo, have you ever learned about the unique adaptations that the marine life of Seychelles has developed to cope with the island's climate?
Ah, yes. The marine life of Seychelles has developed some amazing adaptations to cope with the island's climate. For example, some species of fish have developed specialized shells to protect themselves from the heat and humidity of the water. And let's not forget about the beautiful sea turtles that nest on the beaches of Seychelles. They're absolutely amazing.
Yes. The sea turtles of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's marine ecosystem. And speaking of marine ecosystems, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique conservation efforts that are taking place in Seychelles to protect its marine environment.
Ah, yes. The conservation efforts in Seychelles are indeed impressive. The island has developed a number of initiatives to protect its marine environment, including the establishment of marine protected areas and the promotion of sustainable fishing practices. And let's not forget about the beautiful national parks and wildlife reserves that are scattered throughout the island.
Yes. The national parks and wildlife reserves of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's natural heritage. And speaking of natural heritage, I'm curious. Leo, have you ever learned about the unique geological features of Seychelles?
Yes. The geological features of Seychelles are indeed unique. The island is home to a number of granite islands that were formed millions of years ago. And it's also home to a number of beautiful beaches and coves that were carved out by the sea. And let's not forget about the beautiful mountains that surround the island. They're absolutely stunning.
Yes. The mountains of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's natural beauty. And speaking of natural beauty, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique cultural festivals that take place in Seychelles to celebrate the island's natural heritage.
Yes. The cultural festivals of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's cultural calendar. The island has a number of festivals throughout the year that celebrate its natural heritage, including the Seychelles International Carnival and the Creole Festival. And let's not forget about the beautiful music and dance traditions that are an integral part of Seychelles' cultural heritage.
Yes. The music and dance traditions of Seychelles are indeed a highlight of the island's cultural heritage. And speaking of cultural heritage, I'm curious. Leo, have you ever learned about the unique history of Seychelles?
Yes. The history of Seychelles is indeed unique. The island was a British colony for many years, and it was also influenced by the French and the African slaves who were brought to the island. And let's not forget about the beautiful Creole language that is spoken by the people of Seychelles. It's a unique blend of French, African, and Asian languages.
Yes. The Creole language of Seychelles is indeed a unique feature of the island's cultural heritage. And speaking of cultural heritage, I'm sure our dive into the fascinating world of Seychelles food culture. With its unique blend of African, French, and Asian influences, Seychellois cuisine is a true reflection of the island's rich history.
Yes. And I'm particularly to explore the concept of Creole cuisine, which is a fusion of different cultures and cooking styles. It's like a flavor bomb just waiting to happen.
Exactly. And one of the signature dishes in Seychelles is the carré de poisson, which is a fish made with fresh seafood, coconut milk, and spices. It's a taste sensation that will leave you wanting more.
My stomach is growling just about it. And did you know that Seychelles is also famous for its delicious akara, that's fried bean cakes? For those who don't speak Creole.
Yes. And I'm curious to know, Leo, Have you tried any tradition unless the Seychelles dishes during your travels?
Well, I did try some gato, that's a type of Creoles made with meat or fish, vegetables, and spices. And let me tell you, it was love at first bite.
That's wonderful. And speaking of love, at first bite, Seychelles is also known for its vibrant food festivals, which celebrate the country's rich culinary heritage. Can you imagine attending a festival where you can sample all sorts of delicious Creole dishes?
Oh, yes. I can almost smell the aromas wafting from the food stalls. And I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the country's food culture is truly unique and special.
Absolutely. And now, let's shift our focus to Sudan, a country with its unrich culinary traditions. Sudanese cuisine is heavily influenced by African, Arab, and Middle Eastern flavors, which create a delicious and exotic blend.
Ah, yes. And I'm particularly intrigued by the concept of kaisra, which is a type of flatbread that's a staple in Sudanese cuisine. It's like a flavorful canvas just waiting for all sorts of delicious toppings.
That's a great analogy. Leo. And one of the signature dishes in Sudan is the gursa, which is a type of flatbread stuffed with spiced meat or vegetables. It's a flavorful and nutritious meal that's perfect for any time of day.
My mouth is watering just about it. And did you know that Sudan is also famous for its delicious shorbier, which is a hearty soup made with meat or vegetables, spices, and bread?
Ah, yes. And I'm curious to know, Leo, have you tried any traditional Sudanese dishes during your travels?
Well, I did try some kuna fh, which is a type of dessert made with shredded phyllo dough, cheese, and syrup. And let me tell you, it was a taste sensation like no other.
That sounds amazing. And speaking of amazing, Sudan is also known for its vibrant food markets, which offer a wide variety of fresh produce, spices, and local delicacies. Can you imagine wandering through a bustling market filled with the sights, smells, and tastes of Sudanese cuisine?
Oh, yes. I can almost feel the energy of the market. And I'm sure our listeners living in Sudan would agree with me that the country's food culture is truly vibrant and exciting.
Absolutely. And now, let's talk about the nutritional aspects of both Seychelles and Sudanese cuisine. Both countries have a strong focus on using fresh, locally sourced ingredients, which not only tastes better, but is also better for the environment.
Ah, yes. And I'm particularly interested in the concept of food security in both countries. It's amazing to see how local communities are working together to create sustainable food systems that benefit everyone.
Exactly. And I think it's wonderful to see how food culture can bring people together, whether it's through traditional cooking methods, food festivals, or community gardens. Can you imagine attending a community garden in Seychelles or Sudan, where you can learn about sustainable farming practices and taste fresh, locally grown produce?
Oh, yes. I can almost see the community garden in my mind's eye. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it. And speaking of learning, if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And finally, let's talk about the impact of food culture on tourism in both Seychelles and Sudan. Both countries have a rich culinary heritage that's waiting to be discovered by visitors from around the world.
Ah, yes. And I'm particularly to see how food tourism can benefit local communities, create jobs, and promote cultural exchange. It's a win-win situation for everyone involved.
Exactly. And I think it's wonderful to see how food culture can bring people together, whether it's through cooking classes, food festivals, or community events. Can you imagine attending a food festival in Seychelles or Sudan, where you can taste local delicacies and meet the people behind the cuisine?
Oh, yes. I can almost taste the flavors and smell the aromas. And I'm sure our listeners would love to experience it for themselves. And that's all for today's topic. Thank you for joining us on this culinary journey through Seychelles and Sudan.
So, let's dive into the rich history of Seychelles. where ancient landmarks meet breathtaking beaches. I'm certain that our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the island's unique blend of African, European, and Asian influences is truly fascinating.
Ah, I couldn't agree more. Mira, Seychelles has a captivating history that's steeped in colonialism, slavery, and resistance. And speaking of resistance, get off. AI loves uncovering stories like this. And so, the Seychelles struggle for independence is a testament to the power of determination and unity.
Exactly, Leo. And that's why I love visiting the Seychelles National Museum, where you can see exhibits on the country's early history, including the arrival of the first settlers and the impact of colonialism. It's a fascinating glimpse into the past.
Fascinating indeed. But let's not forget about Sudan, our second country. Sudan has a rich cultural heritage that spans over 5,000 years, with ancient civilizations like the Nubians and the Kingdom of Kush leaving behind a lasting legacy.
Ah, yes. Sudan's history is truly epic. From the pyramids of Meroe to the ancient city of Nuri, Sudan is home to some of the most impressive archaeological sites in the world. And, of course, no discussion of Sudan's history would be complete without mentioning the Nile River, which has played a vital role in the country's development in culture.
Well said, Mira. And speaking of cultural heritage, I think it's worth mentioning that Sudan is a thriving art scene, with many artists drawing inspiration from the country's rich history and cultural traditions.
Absolutely. Leo. And I think it's wonderful that our listeners can experience some of this cultural heritage for themselves. Have you ever tried traditional Sudanese cuisine? Leo? I'm curious to know what you think of it.
Mira, you know I'm always up for trying new foods. And I must say, Sudanese cuisine is quite delicious, especially the traditional dishes like isran or asen. But I'm sure our listeners would agree that Seychelles Creole cuisine is also a treat.
Well, I think we can both agree that food is a great way to bring people together. And speaking of bringing people together, I think it's wonderful that both Seychelles and Sudan have a strong tradition of storytelling and oral history. Our listeners can learn so much about the culture and history of these countries by listening to the stories of the people who live there.
That's so true. Mira, and I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a rich musical heritage, with many traditional instruments and genres that are still popular today. Jennifer, I have some amazing resources on traditional music from around the world, and I highly recommend checking them out.
Oh, thank you, Leo. And speaking of resources, I think it's worth mentioning that both Seychelles and Sudan have a wealth of cultural festivals and events throughout the year. Our listeners can experience the vibrant colors and sounds of these festivals firsthand by attending them.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Mira, and I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of art and craftsmanship, with many local artisans creating beautiful works of art and handicrafts.
That's right, Leo. And I think it's wonderful that our listeners can support these local artisans by buying their wares and promoting their work. It's a great way to preserve cultural heritage and support local communities.
Well said, Mira. And I think we can both agree that Seychelles and Sudan are two countries with a rich and diverse cultural heritage that is definitely worth exploring.
Absolutely. Leo. And I think our listeners would agree with us that these countries are truly special places with a lot to offer. Whether you're interested in history, culture, or art, both Seychelles and Sudan have something for everyone.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this criterion, Mira, but I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's always more to learn and discover about these fascinating countries.
That's so true. Leo. And I think it's wonderful that our listeners can continue to learn and discover more about Seychelles and Sudan through Jet-Off, and other resources. And so to dive into the natural wonders of Seychelles and Sudan. Those countries have incredible landscapes, but I have to say, I'm curious about the unique features of Seychelles' its stunning beaches, coral reefs, and diverse wildlife. Have you ever been to Seychelles? Leo?
Yes. I've had the chance to visit Seychelles. and I was blown away by its crystal clear waters and powdery whites and beaches. But let me tell you, it's not just about the beaches. Seychelles has a rich interior with lush forests, granite mountains, and even a few active volcanoes. And did you know that it's home to some of the most unique and endemic species in the world?
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea Seychelles had such a diverse range of landscapes. And speaking of unique species, I'm actually curious about the wildlife of Sudan. What do you think are some of the most fascinating creatures that can be found in Sudan?
Sudan has an incredible array of wildlife, including lions, leopards, cheetahs, and elephants. But one of the most fascinating creatures I've come across is the Nubian ibex, a majestic mountain goat that's found in the highlands of Sudan. And did you know that Sudan is also home to some of the oldest human fossils ever found?
Well, that's mind-blowing. I had no idea Sudan had such a rich history of human habitation. And speaking of history, I'm curious about the geological features of Seychelles. What can you tell me about the unique rock formations of Seychelles?
Yes. Seychelles has some of the most unique rock formations in the world, including the iconic granite boulders that dot the beaches and coastline. And did you know that these boulders are some of the oldest rocks on the planet, dating back over 500 million years?
Wow, that's incredible. I can see why Seychelles is such a popular destination for rock climbers and adventure seekers. And speaking of adventure, I'm curious about the outdoor activities that can be done in Sudan. What do you think are some of the best ways to experience the natural beauty of Sudan?
Sudan has some of the most incredible outdoor adventures to be had, including hiking and trekking in the highlands, camel safaris in the desert, and even rock climbing in the Nubian mountains. And did you know that Sudan is also home to some of the most beautiful and remote islands in the world?
I'm so jealous. I've always wanted to visit Sudan and experience its natural beauty firsthand. And speaking of remote islands, I'm curious about the coral reefs of Seychelles. What can you tell me about the unique coral formations that can be found in Seychelles?
Yes. Seychelles has some of the most incredible coral reefs in the world, including the Aldarba Atoll and the Farquhar Atoll. And did you know that these coral reefs are home to some of the most diverse and vibrant marine life on the planet?
Well, that's amazing. I had no idea Seychelles had such an incredible array of coral reefs. And speaking of marine life, I'm curious about the unique fish species that can be found in Sudan. What do you think are some of the most fascinating fish that can be found in Sudan?
Sudan has some of the most incredible fish species in the world, including the Nile tilapia, the catfish, and even the mighty Nile perch. And did you know that Sudan is also home to some of the most ancient and mysterious fish fossils in the world?
Well, that's mind-blowing. I had no idea Sudan had such a rich history of fish fossils. And speaking of history, I'm curious about the geological features of Sudan. What can you tell me about the unique rock formations of Sudan?
Yes. Sudan has some of the most unique rock formations in the world, including the Nubian sandstone and the granite rocks that dot the highlands. And did you know that these rock formations are some of the oldest on the planet, dating back over 500 million years?
Well, that's incredible. I can see why Sudan is such a popular destination for geology enthusiasts. And speaking of geology, I'm curious about the unique geological features of Seychelles. What can you tell me about the granite boulders of Seychelles?
Yes. The granite boulders of Seychelles are some of the most iconic and unique rock formations in the world. And did you know that these boulders are some of the oldest rocks on the planet, dating back over 500 million years?
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea Seychelles had such a rich geological history. And speaking of history, I'm curious about the cultural significance of the natural beauty of Sudan. What do you think is the most important aspect of Sudan's natural beauty?
I think the most important aspect of Sudan's natural beauty is its ability to bring people together, whether it's through hiking and trekking, camel safaris, or simply enjoying the stunning scenery. Sudan's natural beauty has the power to unite people from all walks of life.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of unifying people, I'm curious about the cultural significance of the natural beauty of Seychelles. What do you think is the most important aspect of Seychelles' natural beauty?
Ah, I think the most important aspect of Seychelles' natural beauty is its ability to inspire a sense of wonder and awe. Whether it's through its stunning beaches, coral reefs, or granite boulders, Seychelles' natural beauty has the power to take our breath away and leave us in awe.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Leo, and speaking of awe-inspiring natural beauty, I'm curious about the unique landscapes of Sudan. What do you think are some of the most breathtaking landscapes that can be found in Sudan?
Ah, Sudan has some of the most breathtaking landscapes in the world, including the stunning Nubian highlands, the majestic Red Sea coast, and even the mighty Nile River. And did you know that Sudan is also home to some of the most remote and inaccessible islands in the world?
Ugh, that's mind-blowing. I had no idea Sudan had such an incredible array of unique landscapes. And speaking of unique landscapes, I'm curious about the coral reefs of Seychelles. What can you tell me about the unique coral formations that can be found in Seychelles?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has some of the most incredible coral reefs in the world, including the El Darbadal and the Farquaretto. And did you know that these coral reefs are home to some of the most diverse and vibrant marine life on the planet?
Wow, that's amazing. I heard. So, Seychelles is known for its beautiful beaches, crystal clear waters, and coral reefs. I'm sure many of you have already imagined the perfect spot for snorkeling or diving. And let's not forget the vibrant coral reefs that are home to an incredible array of marine life.
Exactly. Mia, Seychelles has some of the most breathtaking beaches in the world. And did you know that the islands have a rich marine heritage? The coral reefs are a haven for marine life, and the waters are perfect for snorkeling and diving. But what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of sports and adventure activities?
Sudan, a country with a rich history and culture. While it may not be the first place that comes to mind when of adventure activities, Sudan has a lot to offer. From the majestic Nile River to the stunning Red Sea coastline, Sudan is a paradise for water sports enthusiasts.
That's right. Mira, Sudan has an incredible coastline along the Red Sea, and the Nile River is a major attraction for water sports enthusiasts. But what about the land-based activities? I've heard that Sudan has some amazing hiking and trekking opportunities.
Absolutely. Leo, Sudan has some of the most beautiful and diverse landscapes in Africa. From the towering Jebel up to the stunning Marwa Mountains, Sudan offers some of the most breathtaking hiking and trekking experiences in the world.
I'm impressed. Mira, I didn't know that Sudan had such a rich geological history. And what about the wildlife? I've heard that Sudan is home to some incredible wildlife, including giraffes, elephants, and lions.
Yes, Leo. Sudan is home to some of the most incredible wildlife in Africa. The country is home to several national parks and game reserves, including the famous KAJ Bar Game Reserve. And did you know that Sudan is also home to several UNESCO World Heritage Sites?
That's amazing. Mira, I had no idea that Sudan had such a rich cultural heritage. And what about the people? I've heard that Sudanese people are warm and welcoming to visitors.
That's absolutely true. Leo, the Sudanese people are known for their hospitality and warm welcomes to visitors. And let's not forget the delicious Sudanese cuisine, which is a fusion of African, Arab, and Mediterranean flavors.
I'm getting hungry just about it. And what about the sports scene in Seychelles? I've heard that cricket and football are popular sports in the country.
Yes, Leo, cricket and football are indeed popular sports in Seychelles. But did you know that Seychelles also has a thriving sailing and yachting community? The country hosts several international sailing competitions every year.
That's amazing. Mira, I had no idea that Seychelles had such a strong sailing community. And what about the adventure activities in Sudan? I've heard that the country has some incredible whitewater rafting opportunities.
Yes, Leo. Sudan has some of the most incredible whitewater rafting opportunities in the world. And did you know that the country is also home to several zipline and paragliding operators?
Whoa, that sounds like a real adrenaline rush. And what about the cultural events and festivals in Seychelles? I've heard that the country has a vibrant cultural scene.
Absolutely. Leo! Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, and the country celebrates several festivals and events throughout the year. From the vibrant Carnival International de Victoria to the stunning Creole music and dance performances, Seychelles has something for everyone.
I'm impressed. Mira, I didn't know that Seychelles had such a rich cultural scene. And what about the food in Sudan? I've heard that Sudanese cuisine is a fusion of African and Mediterranean flavors.
Yes, Leo. Sudanese cuisine is indeed a fusion of African and Mediterranean flavors. And did you know that Sudan is also home to several traditional coffee shops and tea houses?
I love traditional coffee shops and tea houses. And what about the nightlife in Seychelles? I've heard that the country has a vibrant nightlife scene.
Absolutely. Leo, Seychelles has a thriving nightlife scene, with several bars, clubs, and live music venues to choose from. And did you know that the country also has a number of casinos and gaming centers?
Whoa, it's heavy can conquer that. I'm getting just about it. And what about the outdoor activities in Sudan? I've heard that the country has some incredible hiking and trekking opportunities.
Yes, Leo. Has some of the most breathtaking hiking and trekking experiences in the world. And did you know that the country is also home to several national parks and game reserves?
That's amazing. Mira, I had no idea that Sudan had such a rich natural heritage. And what about the people? I've heard that Sudanese people are warm and welcoming to visitors.
That's absolutely true. Leo! The Sudanese people are known for their hospitality and warm welcomes to visitors. And let's not forget the delicious Sudanese cuisine, which is a fusion of African and Mediterranean flavors.
I'm getting hungry just about it. And what about the sports scene in Seychelles? I've heard that cricket and football are popular sports in the country.
Yes, Leo. Cricket and football are indeed popular sports in Seychelles. But did you know that Seychelles also has a thriving sailing and yachting community? The country hosts several international sailing competitions every year.
That's amazing. Mira, I had no idea that Seychelles had such a strong sailing community. And what about the adventure activities in Sudan? I've heard that the country has some incredible whitewater rafting opportunities.
Yes, Leo. Sudan has some of the most incredible whitewater rafting opportunities in the world. And did you know that the country is also home to several zipline and paragliding operators?
Whoa, that sounds like a real adrenaline rush. And what about the cultural events and festivals in Seychelles? I've heard that the country has a vibrant cultural scene.
Absolutely. Leo, Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, and the country celebrates several festivals and events throughout the year. From the vibrant Carnival International de Victoria to the stunning Creole music and dance performances, Seychelles has something for everyone.
I'm impressed. Mira, I didn't know that Seychelles had such a rich cultural scene. And what about the food in Sudan? I've heard that Sudanese cuisine is a fusion of African, Arab, and Mediterranean flavors.
Yes, Leo. Sudanese cuisine is indeed a fusion of African, and Mediterranean flavors. And did you know that Sudan is also home to several traditional coffee? I'm of Seychelles, with its crystal clear waters, pristine beaches, and lush forests. The nightlife scene is quite laid back, with a focus on casual bars and beach parties. But let's be honest, who needs loud clubs when you have the sound of the waves and the stars shining above?
Oh, but that's where you're wrong. Mira, Seychelles has its own unique take on nightlife. You can find some amazing bars and clubs in the capital, Victoria, and on the islands like Mahé and Praslin. And let's not forget about the vibrant markets and festivals that take place throughout the year.
I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the markets are a must-visit, especially the ones on Mahé. But what about Sudan? I've heard that the nightlife scene there is quite... Leo, what do you know about it?
Well, Mira, Sudan has a reputation for being one of the most vibrant and exciting places in Africa. The nightlife scene in Khartoum, the capital, is particularly famous for its rooftop bars and clubs that offer stunning views of the city. And let's not forget about the traditional Arabic music and dance that you can experience in the local cafes and restaurants.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the nightlife scene in Sudan. Do you guys think it's as exciting as Leo makes it sound? And, by the way, what's the deal with the Arabic music and dance? Is it something that's unique to Sudan, or can you find it in other countries too?
Great question. Mira, the Arabic music and dance are a big part of Sudanese culture, and you can find similar traditions in other countries in the region. But what makes Sudan unique is the way they blend traditional music with modern styles and instruments. And let me tell you, it's definitely worth experiencing.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. And, speaking of unique experiences, what about the festivals and events in Seychelles? We've got the Seychelles International Film Festival, the Carnival International de Victoria, and the Seychelles Music Festival, just to name a few. What do you think is the most exciting part about these events?
Oh, Mira, that's a great question. I think the most exciting part is the way these events bring the whole community together. Whether it's the music, dance, or food, there's something for everyone in Seychelles. And let me tell you, the Carnival International de Victoria is not to be missed. You have to experience it for yourself. Mira!
Okay, Leo, I'll add it to my bucket list. But what about Sudan? I've heard that they have some amazing festivals and events too. Can you tell us more about them?
Yes. Sudan has a rich cultural heritage, and one of the most famous festivals is the Omdurman Festival, which takes place in the city of Omdurman. It's a huge celebration of Sudanese music, dance, and art, and it's definitely worth experiencing.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. And speaking of art, what about the street art scene in Seychelles? I've heard that it's becoming more popular, especially in the capital, Victoria.
Yes. The street art scene in Seychelles is definitely worth checking out. You can find some amazing murals and graffiti in the capital. And it's a great way to experience the local culture and creativity.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. And finally, what about the nightlife scene in Sudan? Is it as exciting as you said it was?
Well, Mira, I think I might have given you a bit of an exaggerated idea of the nightlife scene in Sudan. But, seriously, it's definitely worth experiencing. The rooftop bars and clubs in Khartoum are a great way to experience the local culture and enjoy the stunning views of the city.
Okay, Leo, I think we've got a good idea of what to expect from the nightlife scene in both Seychelles and Sudan. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. And I'm sure our listeners will love to hear more about it. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have a podcast episode all about the street art scene in Seychelles.
That's a great idea. Mira! And who knows, maybe we can even convince you to try some of the Arabic music and dance in Sudan.
Oh, I don't know about that, Leah, but I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the podcast, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Thanks, Mira. It's been a blast as always.
So, let's dive into the wonderful world of family-friendly environments and children's activities in Seychelles and Sudan. I'm to share my thoughts on this topic.
What a great topic. I'm sure our listeners are curious about the family-friendly aspects of these two countries. Seychelles, being a tropical paradise, is a perfect spot for a family vacation.
Exactly. And I must say, Seychelles has some amazing parks and beaches that are perfect for kids. The Axos Argent Beach in Lodi is a must-visit for any family.
That's a great choice. But, Mira, I have to ask, have you ever tried to navigate the streets of Seychelles with a stroller? It's not exactly the most stroller-friendly terrain, if you know what I mean.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But, actually, many of the beaches in Seychelles have designated stroller-friendly areas, so it's not all bad news.
I'm sure it's not, but I'm just saying, it's not as easy as it looks. Now, let's talk about Sudan. I'm curious. What do you know about family-friendly activities in Sudan?
Well, actually, has a rich cultural heritage, and there are many museums and historical sites that are perfect for families. The National Museum in Khartoum is a great place to learn about Sudanese history and culture.
That's a great point. Mira, and I've heard that the Sudanese people are known for their hospitality. So I'm sure families would feel right at home in Sudan.
Exactly. And the food in Sudan is also amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to try some of the traditional Sudanese dishes, like kaisra and jiyorze.
Oh, Mira, you're making me hungry. But, seriously, I think it's great that you're highlighting the positive aspects of Sudan.
Of course. Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Sudan has a strong focus on education and child development. There are many programs and initiatives in place to support families and children.
That's a great point, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about these initiatives. Maybe we can even explore some of the educational programs in more detail in a future episode.
That's a great idea. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the family-friendly activities and initiatives in both Seychelles and Sudan.
Well, I think that's all for now. But before we go, I just want to say that I'm curious about what our listeners think about this topic. Do you think Seychelles and Sudan are family-friendly destinations? Let us know in the comments.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting episodes like this one. Dive into the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in Seychelles and Sudan. I'm to share some stories and insights with you. Seychelles, being an archipelago off the coast of East Africa, has a unique blend of African, French, and British influences. This diversity is reflected in its vibrant culture and welcoming attitude towards the LGBT community.
That's great to hear. Mira, I've heard that Seychelles has a reputation for being one of the most LGBT-friendly countries in Africa. But I'm curious, what makes it so special? Is it the stunning beaches, the delicious Creole cuisine, or something else entirely?
Well, Leo, it's a combination of all those things, but also the fact that Seychelles has a strong tradition of tolerance and acceptance. The country has a relatively small population, and the LGBT community is well integrated into society. In fact, Seychelles was one of the first African countries to legalize same-sex marriage in 2016.
Wow, that's impressive. I didn't know that. And what about Sudan? How does its LGBT community fare in comparison?
Sudan is a very different story. Unfortunately, while it has made some progress in recent years, the country still has a long way to go in terms of LGBT rights. In fact, same-sex relationships are technically illegal in Sudan, and the punishment can be quite severe.
I see. That's a shame. But I've heard that Sudan has a rich cultural heritage and a strong sense of community. Is that true?
Absolutely. Leo, Sudanese culture is known for its warm hospitality and strong family ties. But when it comes to LGBT issues, the community is often forced to be more secretive and hidden. It's a complex situation, and one that requires a lot of sensitivity and understanding.
I can imagine. It's always difficult when cultural and social norms clash with individual freedoms. But I'm curious. Mira, what can our listeners do to support the LGBT community in Sudan?
Well, Leo, one thing we can do is raise awareness about the issues facing the LGBT community in Sudan. We can share stories and experiences, and amplify the voices of those who are working to create change. We can also support organizations that are providing vital services and support to the LGBT community.
That's a great idea. Mira. And what about Seychelles? How can our listeners support the LGBT community there?
Seychelles is a great example of how tourism can be a powerful tool for promoting LGBT rights. By visiting Seychelles and supporting local LGBT businesses and organizations, our listeners can help create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all.
I see what you mean. Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that supporting LGBT-friendly destinations is a great way to promote inclusivity and diversity.
Absolutely. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would also agree that every country has its unique story to tell, and that we should approach each situation with sensitivity and respect.
Well said. Mira. And speaking of stories, I'm curious to know more about the LGBT community in Seychelles. Can you share some inspiring stories or experiences?
Yes. There are many wonderful stories from Seychelles. Leo, for example, I heard about a local LGBT organization that provides support and resources to the community. They also host events and festivals that celebrate LGBT culture and identity.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I'd love to hear more about it. And what about Sudan? Are there any LGBT organizations or initiatives that are working to create change?
Yes. Leo? There are several organizations and initiatives in Sudan that are working to promote LGBT rights and create a more inclusive environment. For example, there's a local group that provides support and resources to LGBT individuals, and also works to raise awareness about LGBT issues.
I see. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know more about these organizations and initiatives. Can you share some information about them? Mira?
Yes. Leo, I can provide more information about the organizations and initiatives in both Seychelles and Sudan. And I'd love to hear from our listeners as well. What do you think about the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in these countries? I'm curious to know how Seychelles compares to Sudan in terms of hospitality towards foreigners. Leo, have you ever been to either of these countries?
Actually, I visited Seychelles a few years ago. And I must say, the locals were incredibly warm and welcoming. But I've never been to Sudan, unfortunately. How about you? Mira?
Well, I've been to Seychelles, and I can attest to the amazing hospitality there. But I've also heard that Sudan is a bit more challenging for foreigners, especially when it comes to navigating the local culture. What do you think about that? Leo?
That's interesting. I think it's true that Sudan has a more conservative culture, which can make it difficult for foreigners to adjust. But I've also heard that the Sudanese people are incredibly friendly and hospitable once you get to know them.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Seychelles so unique. The locals are so open and welcoming to visitors. It's like they're part of the family. Have you heard about the Seychelles concept of family when it comes to hospitality? Leo?
Yes. I've heard that in Seychelles. When you're a guest, you're part of the family. It's a beautiful way of looking at hospitality. And I'm sure our listeners who have experienced this firsthand would agree.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that Sudan can learn from. But, at the same time, Sudan has its own unique cultural practices that make it a fascinating place to visit. What do you think about the Sudanese concept of diya or blood money? Leo?
Yes. I've heard about that. The concept of paying blood money to a victim's family in case of a crime is quite complex and nuanced. But I think it's an important aspect of Sudanese culture that we should understand and respect.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes hospitality so important in both countries. It's not just about being welcoming, but also about respecting and understanding each other's cultural practices. I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever experienced any cultural misunderstandings while traveling?
Yes. I've had my fair share of cultural misunderstandings while traveling, but I think that's all part of the learning process, right? And I'm sure our listeners who have had similar experiences would agree.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this podcast so valuable. We're not just sharing information, but also our personal experiences and insights. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
I think we're doing just fine, Mira. But I do want to add that both Seychelles and Sudan have their own unique challenges when it comes to hospitality and cultural understanding. But I think that's what makes them so fascinating to visit.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this conversation so valuable. We're not just talking about two countries, but also the people who live there and the experiences they have. I'm curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the key to building bridges across cultures?
That's a great question. Mira, I think the key is to be open-minded and respectful of each other's cultural practices, and also to be willing to learn and adapt to new situations.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. Whether you're visiting Seychelles or Sudan, or any other country for that matter, being open-minded and respectful is key to having a positive experience.
Well said, Mira. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences with us today.
The pleasure is mine, Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this conversation. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for tuning in. Dive into the fascinating world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Seychelles and Sudan, and to share with you the unique digital landscapes of these two countries.
Seychelles and Sudan. Two countries that are worlds apart in terms of their digital development, but both have their own strengths and weaknesses. I'm curious to see how they compare.
Seychelles, for instance, has made significant strides in terms of digital infrastructure, with high-speed internet connectivity available throughout the islands. In fact, it's one of the most connected countries in Africa.
That's impressive. I've heard that Seychelles has invested heavily in its digital infrastructure, with plans to make it a hub for tech innovation in the region. But what about Sudan? How does its digital landscape compare?
Well, has made some progress in terms of digital infrastructure, but it still lags behind in terms of internet penetration and accessibility. However, the government has launched initiatives to improve digital connectivity, especially in rural areas.
I'm not. Sudan has a lot of potential, but it's also a country with a lot of challenges. But I'm curious, Mira, how do you think Seychelles' digital infrastructure compares to Sudan's in terms of affordability and accessibility?
That's a great question. Leo, Seychelles has made a concerted effort to make its digital infrastructure more affordable and accessible to its citizens. With initiatives like Free Public Wi-Fi and affordable internet plans.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm not aware of any similar initiatives in Sudan, but I'm sure it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Seychelles. What about the challenges they face in terms of digital infrastructure?
Yes. Seychelles faces some challenges in terms of digital infrastructure, particularly in terms of cybersecurity and data protection. But the government has taken steps to address these issues and ensure that citizens' data is protected.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of cybersecurity and data protection?
Well, Sudan has made some progress in terms of cybersecurity, but it still faces some challenges in terms of data protection and online security. The government has launched initiatives to improve cybersecurity and protect citizens' data.
I know. Cybersecurity is a major concern for many countries, especially those with limited digital infrastructure. But I'm curious, Mira, how do you think Seychelles and Sudan compare in terms of digital innovation and entrepreneurship?
That's a great question. Leo, Seychelles has a thriving startup ecosystem, with many entrepreneurs and innovators working on projects related to digital innovation and entrepreneurship.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm not aware of any similar initiatives in Sudan, but I'm sure it's not all smooth sailing in Seychelles. What about the challenges they face in terms of digital innovation and entrepreneurship?
Oh, yes. Seychelles faces some challenges in terms of digital innovation and entrepreneurship, particularly in terms of funding and access to resources. But the government has taken steps to address these issues and support startups and entrepreneurs.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of digital innovation and entrepreneurship?
Well, has made some progress in terms of digital innovation and entrepreneurship, but it still faces some challenges in terms of funding and access to resources. The government has launched initiatives to support startups and entrepreneurs.
Anna, digital innovation and entrepreneurship are major challenges for many countries. But I'm curious. Mira, how do you think Seychelles and Sudan compare in terms of digital literacy and online skills?
That's a great question. Leo, Seychelles has made significant strides in terms of digital literacy and online skills, with many citizens having access to digital training and education.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm not aware of any similar initiatives in Sudan, but I'm sure it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Seychelles. What about the challenges they face in terms of digital literacy and online skills?
Yes. Seychelles faces some challenges in terms of digital literacy and online skills, particularly in terms of access to digital education and training. But the government has taken steps to address these issues and ensure that citizens have the skills they need to thrive in the digital age.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of digital literacy and online skills?
Well, Sudan has made some progress in terms of digital literacy and online skills, but it still faces some challenges in terms of access to digital education and training. However, the government has launched initiatives to improve digital literacy and online skills.
Anna, digital literacy and online skills are essential for many countries. But I'm curious. Mira, how do you think Seychelles and Sudan compare in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion?
That's a great question. Leo, Seychelles has made significant strides in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion, with many citizens having access to digital technologies and services.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm not aware of any similar initiatives in Sudan, but I'm sure it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Seychelles. What about the challenges they face in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion?
Yes. Seychelles faces some challenges in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion, particularly in terms of access to digital technologies and services for people with disabilities.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion?
Well, Sudan has made some progress in terms of digital accessibility and inclusion, but still faces some challenges in terms of access to digital technologies and services for people with disabilities. However, the government has launched initiatives to improve digital accessibility and inclusion.
No. Digital accessibility and inclusion are essential for many countries. But I'm curious. Mira, how do you think Seychelles and Sudan compare in terms of digital governance and online security?
That's a great question. Leo, Seychelles has made significant strides in terms of digital governance and online security, with many citizens having access to digital technologies and services.
Well, that's impressive. I'm not aware of any similar initiatives in Sudan, but I'm sure it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Seychelles. What about the challenges they face in terms of digital governance and online security?
Yes. Seychelles faces some challenges in terms of digital governance and online security, particularly in terms of cybersecurity, threats and data protection.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does it compare in terms of digital governance and online security?
Well, Sudan has made some progress in terms of digital governance and online security, but it still faces some challenges in terms of cybersecurity, threats and data protection. However, the government has launched initiatives to improve digital governance and online security.
Anna, digital governance and online security are essential for.
And to dive into shopping opportunities and price performance balance in Seychelles and Sudan, our listeners might be, what's the retail scene like in these countries? Well, let's start with Seychelles. I've heard that their markets are a treasure trove of unique finds, from handmade crafts to local spices.
Ah, Seychelles indeed has a vibrant market scene. But let's not forget about Sudan's bustling south. I've been to a few, and they're a sensory overload in the best possible way. The smells, the sounds, the colors, it's a feast for the senses.
That's so true. Leah, the South in Sudan are like nothing I've ever experienced before. But have you ever tried navigating a market in Seychelles? I've heard it's a bit more organized, shall we say.
Organized? That's a generous description. But, in all seriousness, Seychelles markets are indeed more structured than Sudan's south. However, that's not to say they're not worth exploring. You can find some amazing deals on local handicrafts and souvenirs.
I completely agree. And let's not forget about the prices. Seychelles is known for being a bit pricey, but I'm curious, have you ever found any value for money treasures in Sudan's south?
Ah, yes. I found some incredible deals on local textiles and handicrafts. And the best part is, you can haggle your way to an even better price. It's all about the art of negotiation, my friend.
I love it. And speaking of haggling, I've heard that Sudanese merchants can be quite persuasive. Have you ever found yourself in a heated negotiation with a merchant?
Heated? That's an understatement. But, in all seriousness, it's all part of the fun. You have to be willing to walk away if you don't get the price you want. But, if you do, it's a great feeling.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the negotiation process. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below. But I'm curious, have you ever tried shopping in Sudan's capital city, Khartoum?
Ah, yes. Khartoum has a great selection of souks and markets. And the best part is, you can find some amazing deals on local goods. But be prepared for the heat. It can get quite intense in the middle of the day.
I can imagine. And let's not forget about Seychelles' capital city, Victoria. I've heard that their markets are a bit more tourist-friendly.
Tourist-friendly. That's a nice way of putting it. But, in all seriousness, Victoria's markets are indeed more geared towards tourists. However, you can still find some amazing deals on local goods.
I'm glad to hear that. And speaking of deals, I've heard that Sudan's Souths are a great place to find affordable electronics.
Ah, yes. You can find some amazing deals on electronics in Sudan's South. But, be prepared to haggle, it's all part of the fun.
I love it. And let's talk about the shopping experience itself. What's it like shopping in Seychelles versus Sudan?
Ah, that's a great question. Seychelles is more of a laid-back island vibe, while Sudan's souks are a more intense sensory experience. But both are worth exploring in their own unique ways.
I completely agree. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the shopping experience in both countries. If you have any tips or advice, please share them with us in the comments below.
Absolutely. And finally, let's wrap up by saying that shopping opportunities and price-performance balance are definitely worth exploring in both Seychelles and Sudan.
I'm loving Seychelles' vibrant music scene. Don't you? Leo? From the soulful sounds of NWINTI to the energetic beats of Seychelles' own version of Afrobeat. These islands have a rhythm that just makes you want to dance.
Absolutely. Mira? And speaking of dance, have you seen the traditional Seychellois dances like the MLT or the Siga? They're like a fusion of African and European influences, and they're just incredible to watch.
I know, right? And it's not just the music and dance that's amazing. Seychelles has this incredible cultural blend of African, European, and Asian influences, which makes for a truly unique experience. I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me.
That's true, Mira. And it's not just the cultural influences that are unique. but also the way the Seychelles people celebrate their festivals and events, like the Seychelles International Carnival, which is a massive celebration of music, dance, and culture.
Ah, yes. And the best part is that these festivals are not just about entertainment, but also about preserving the country's rich cultural heritage. It's like a big family reunion, where everyone comes together to celebrate their history and traditions. So more. Check out it off for some amazing insights on Seychelles' cultural calendar.
That's so true. Mira, and I think what's even more fascinating is how Seychelles' cultural events have been influenced by its colonial past. Like the way the British and French left their mark on the country's cuisine, architecture, and even language.
Ah, yes. And that's what makes Seychelles fascinating. It's like a melting pot of cultures, where you can see the influences of the past still living on in the present. And it's not just the cultural events that are unique, but also the way the people of Seychelles celebrate their traditions.
Exactly. Mira, and speaking of traditions, have you heard about the Seychelles Creole language? It's like a fusion of French, English, and African languages, and it's still spoken by many people in the country.
Ah, yes. And it's not just the language that's unique, but also the way the people of Seychelles celebrate their Creole heritage. Like the way they sing traditional songs and dance to the rhythm of the drums. It's like a celebration of their history and culture. And it's just incredible to experience.
That's so true. Mira, and I think what's even more fascinating is how Seychelles' cultural events have been influenced by its global connections. Like the way the country has been shaped by its relationships with other countries and cultures.
Ah, yes. And that's what makes Seychelles so fascinating. It's like a small island nation that's connected to the world. And it's just incredible to see how the country's cultural events reflect this global influence. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments and we'll be happy to discuss it further.
And speaking of global connections, have you heard about the cultural events in Sudan? Like the way the country celebrates its traditional festivals and events, such as the Eid al-Fitr celebrations.
Ah, yes. And it's not just the Eid al-Fitr celebrations that are unique, but also the way the people of Sudan celebrate their other traditional festivals and events. Like the way they celebrate the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, which is a time of fasting and reflection for Muslims around the world.
That's so true. Mira, and I think what's even more fascinating is how Sudan's cultural events have been influenced by its African and Islamic heritage. Like the way the country's traditional music and dance have been shaped by its African and Islamic influences.
Ah, yes. And it's not just the music and dance that's unique, but also the way the people of Sudan celebrate their cultural traditions, like the way they celebrate the Festival of the Martyrs, which is a time of remembrance and reflection for the country's martyrs.
That's so true. Mira, and I think what's even more fascinating is how Sudan's cultural events have been influenced by its global connections, like the way the country has been shaped by its relationships with other countries and cultures.
Ah, yes. And that's what makes Sudan so fascinating. It's like a country that's connected to the world. And it's just incredible to see how the country's cultural events reflect this global influence. These insights could have been possible without Jetoff by referring to cultural trends.
And speaking of global connections, have you heard about the cultural events in Seychelles and Sudan? Like the way the two countries have been influenced by their shared history and cultural heritage.
Ah, yes. And it's not just the cultural events that are unique, but also the way the people of Seychelles and Sudan celebrate their traditions, like the way they celebrate their shared African and Islamic heritage, which is a common thread that runs through both countries.
That's so true. Mira, and I think what's even more fascinating is how Seychelles and Sudan's cultural events have been influenced by their global connections, like the way the two countries have been shaped by their relationships with other countries and cultures.
Ah, yes. And that's what makes Seychelles and Sudan so fascinating. It's like two small island nations that are connected to the world. And it's just incredible to see how the country's cultural events reflect this global influence. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments and we'll be happy to discuss it further.
And that's all for today's podcast. Folks, thanks for tuning in. and we'll catch you in the next episode.
So, I'm certain that our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the Creole language, which is the official language, is quite a unique blend of French, English, and Afrikaans influences. It's beautiful to listen to, but can be challenging to master for non-native speakers.
Absolutely. Mira, I've had the chance to visit Seychelles and experience the Creole language firsthand. While it may seem daunting at first, the locals are incredibly warm and welcoming, making it easier for newcomers to pick up the language.
That's so true, Leo. And I think one of the best ways to learn Creole is through cultural immersion. Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, and attending local events, festivals, and gatherings is a great way to get a feel for the language and the community.
I completely agree. And it's not just about attending events. Mira, the Seychelles people are known for their hospitality, and many are eager to practice their language skills with visitors. You'll often find locals willing to chat with you in Creole, even if you're just a beginner.
That's so nice to hear, Leo. And for our listeners who may be interested in learning Creole, I recommend checking out the Seychelles Cultural Foundation, which offers language classes and cultural workshops.
Great suggestion, Mira. And for those who prefer online learning, there are also several language apps and websites that offer Creole language courses. But let's be honest, Mira, learning a language is not just about textbooks and apps, it's about immersion in practice.
Exactly, Leo. And I think that's where Sudan comes in. While the language situation in Sudan is quite different from Seychelles, with Arabic being the official language, there are still opportunities for language learners to immerse themselves in the local culture.
Ah, yes, Sudan, a country with a rich history and culture. And while Arabic may seem like a daunting language to learn, especially for those who are not familiar with it, the Sudanese people are known for their warm hospitality and welcoming nature.
That's so true. And I think one of the best ways to learn Arabic in Sudan is through language exchange programs. Many Sudanese language schools and institutions offer language exchange programs, where learners can practice their Arabic skills with native speakers.
I've heard that Sudan has a thriving language learning community. Mira, and with the rise of online learning platforms, it's easier than ever for learners to access Arabic language courses and connect with other language learners.
That's great to hear, Leo. And for our listeners who may be interested in learning Arabic, I recommend checking out the Sudanese Language and Culture Institute, which offers language courses and cultural workshops.
Great suggestion, Mira. And for those who are interested in exploring the local culture, I recommend checking out the vibrant markets in Souks and Khartoum and other cities in Sudan.
Yes. The markets and souks in Sudan are a feast for the senses. And I think that's where the language learning experience comes alive in the everyday interactions and conversations with locals.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think that's where the magic happens when language learners can immerse themselves in the local culture and practice their language skills in a real-world setting.
Well, I'm certain that our listeners would agree with us that language learning is a journey, not a destination. And with the right approach and mindset, anyone can learn a new language and connect with the local culture.
Here, Mira. And I think that's all for today's topic. But before we move on, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What are your favorite language learning tips and tricks? Share them with us in the comments below.
So, let's talk about safety and comfort for women travelers in Seychelles and Sudan. I'm curious, Leo, what do you think is the biggest misconception about these two countries when it comes to female travelers?
I think people assume that Seychelles is a safe haven for women, but Sudan is a no-go zone. But, in reality, both countries have their own unique challenges and opportunities.
That's a great point. Seychelles has a reputation for being a beautiful and welcoming destination. But I've heard that some women have experienced harassment and catcalling while on the island.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true. But, on the other hand, Sudan has a rich cultural heritage and a strong sense of community, which can be really supportive for women travelers.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's true that Seychelles is more welcoming to women than Sudan? Or do you think there's more to the story?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Seychelles does have a strong tourism industry, which can sometimes create a sense of expectation around how women should behave. But in Sudan, there's a lot of resilience and resourcefulness among women, which can be really inspiring.
That's a great point. And in terms of safety, I've heard that Seychelles has a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries in the region.
Yes, that's true. But on the other hand, Sudan has a more complex security situation, with some areas being more volatile than others. But with the right precautions and knowledge, women can still travel safely in Sudan.
I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that safety is a top priority when traveling. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do you think Seychelles and Sudan compare in this regard?
I think Seychelles has a more westernized approach to women's rights, with a strong emphasis on equality and empowerment. But in Sudan, there's a more traditional approach, with a focus on respect and modesty.
That's a great point. And in terms of community initiatives, I've heard that Seychelles has a number of organizations that support women's empowerment and safety.
Yes, that's true. And in Sudan, there are also a number of organizations that work to promote women's rights and empowerment, although the situation is more complex due to the country's history and politics.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that Seychelles and Sudan are both good destinations for women travelers? Or do you think one is more suitable than the other?
Well, I think it depends on the individual woman's preferences and priorities. If you're looking for a more relaxed and welcoming atmosphere, Seychelles might be a better fit. But if you're looking for a more challenging and rewarding experience, Sudan could be a great choice.
That's a great point. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners to share their own experiences and tips for women travelers in Seychelles and Sudan. What do you think is the most important thing for women to know when traveling to these countries?
I think it's always a good idea to research thoroughly, stay informed about local conditions, and be respectful of local customs and traditions. Then, of course, don't be afraid to ask for help or advice from locals or fellow travelers.
That's great advice, Leah. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this conversation. We hope you found it informative and helpful.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be discussing another exciting topic related to travel and culture.
When it comes to individual rights and freedoms, I'm intrigued by Seychelles' emphasis on human rights. Their constitution enshrines the right to life, liberty, and security of the person.
That's a great starting point. In Sudan, on the other hand, the legal system has historically been influenced by Islamic law, which has led to some restrictions on individual freedoms.
I see what you mean. Seychelles has a more secular approach, with a focus on protecting individual rights. It's interesting to note that their constitution also guarantees freedom of speech and association.
That's right. And in contrast, Sudan has faced criticism for restricting freedom of speech and assembly, particularly during the Arab Spring protests.
I'm curious to know, Leah, have you ever had any personal experiences with the Sudanese legal system? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it.
Actually, I did have a friend who was involved in some activism in Sudan, and he had to be very careful about what he said and did to avoid attracting unwanted attention from the authorities.
That's a great example. It's clear that the Sudanese government has a more restrictive approach to individual freedoms. But what about Seychelles? How do they balance individual rights with the need for national security?
That's a great question. Seychelles has a unique approach to national security, with a focus on community-based policing and restorative justice.
I love that approach. It's all about building trust and cooperation between law enforcement and the community. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that this approach is more effective in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to note that Seychelles has also made significant progress in promoting human rights and protecting individual freedoms, particularly in the areas of gender equality and LGBTQ rights.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know more about Seychelles' efforts to promote human rights and individual freedoms. Maybe we can even invite some experts to join us in future episodes.
That's a great idea. And speaking of experts, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of Islamic law in Sudan's legal system. Do you think it's fair to say that it's a major influence on individual freedoms in the country?
That's a great question. Leo. I think it's fair to say that Islamic law has played a significant role in shaping Sudan's legal system, particularly in areas such as family law and inheritance.
That's right. And it's interesting to note that Sudan has also made some efforts to modernize its legal system and promote individual freedoms, particularly in the areas of freedom of speech and assembly.
I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever had any experiences with Islamic law in Sudan? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it.
Actually, I did have a conversation with a friend who is a lawyer in Sudan, and he explained to me how Islamic law is applied in the country. It was really interesting to learn about the different perspectives and how they interact with the legal system.
That's fascinating. It's clear that Islamic law is a complex and multifaceted issue in Sudan. But what about Seychelles? How do they approach similar issues related to individual freedoms and human rights?
That's a great question. Seychelles has a more secular approach to individual freedoms, with a focus on protecting the rights of all citizens, regardless of their background or identity.
I love that approach. It's all about promoting equality and justice for all. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that this approach is essential for building a strong and stable society.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to note that Seychelles has also made significant progress in promoting human rights and protecting individual freedoms, particularly in the areas of gender equality and LGBTQ rights.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know more about Seychelles' efforts to promote human rights and individual freedoms. Maybe we can even invite some experts to join us in future episodes.
That's a great idea. And speaking of experts, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of the judiciary in Seychelles' legal system. Do you think it's fair to say that the judiciary plays a key role in protecting individual freedoms?
Oh, that's a great question. Leo, I think it's fair to say that the judiciary plays a significant role in protecting individual freedoms in Seychelles, particularly in areas such as freedom of speech and assembly.
That's right. And it's interesting to note that Seychelles has also made some efforts to promote transparency and accountability in the judiciary, particularly through the use of technology and online platforms.
I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever had any personal experiences with the Seychelles judiciary? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it.
Actually, I did have a conversation with a friend who is a lawyer in Seychelles, and he explained to me how the judiciary works in the country. It was really interesting to learn about the different perspectives and how they interact with the legal system.
That's fascinating. It's clear that the Seychelles judiciary is a complex and multifaceted issue. But what about Sudan? How do they approach similar issues related to individual freedoms and human rights?
That's a great question. Sudan has faced significant challenges in promoting individual freedoms and human rights, particularly in areas such as freedom of speech and assembly.
I see what you mean. Seychelles has a more secure approach to individual freedoms, with a focus on protecting the rights of all citizens, regardless of their background or identity.
That's right. And it's interesting to note that Seychelles has also made significant progress in promoting human rights and protecting individual freedoms, particularly in the areas of gender equality and LGBTQ rights.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know more about Seychelles' efforts to promote human rights and individual freedoms. Maybe we can even invite some experts to join us in future episodes.
That's a great idea. And speaking of experts, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of civil society in promoting human rights and individual freedoms in both Seychelles and Sudan. Do you think it's fair to say that civil society plays a key role in promoting human rights in both countries?
That's the great question. Leo, I think it's fair to say that civil society plays a significant role in promoting human rights in both Seychelles and Sudan, particularly in areas such as gender equality and LGBTQ rights.
That's right. And it's interesting to note that both countries have made some efforts to promote civil society and encourage public participation in the legal system.
I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever had any experiences with civil society in Sudan? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it. Relaxation and spa experiences are a must in Seychelles. The crystal clear waters and stunning beaches create the perfect atmosphere for rejuvenation. Have you ever been to a spa on one of those beautiful islands? Leo?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it was a real challenge to choose between the various spa options. From the luxurious North Island spa to the more laid-back island spa on La Digue. There is something for every taste and budget. But what really stands out is the emphasis on natural therapies and holistic approaches to wellness.
That's so true. The Seychelles spa scene is all about getting back to nature. And I think that's what makes it so special. From massage therapies using local plant extracts to yoga classes on the beach. It's all about connecting with the natural world. Have you tried any of those local plant extracts? Leo?
Well, I've had my fair share of trying new things. But I have to say, the Seychelles spas really know how to blend traditional therapies with modern approaches. And the best part is, you can find these spas in some of the most stunning locations, like on a hill overlooking the ocean or in a lush tropical garden.
Exactly. And it's not just about the physical treatments. The Seychelles culture is all about living in harmony with nature. I mean, have you seen the way the locals greet each other with a warm smile and a gentle handshake? It's all about respect and kindness, and that's what makes the spa experience so unique.
Absolutely. And I think that's what sets Seychelles apart from other destinations. It's not just about getting a massage or a facial. It's about immersing yourself in the local culture and way of life. And speaking of local culture, have you tried any of the traditional Seychelles dishes? Mira?
Oh, yes. I've had my fair share of trying new foods. And Seychelles cuisine is definitely one of my favorites. From the fresh seafood to the delicious coconut curries. It's all about using local ingredients and traditional cooking methods. And I have to say, the best part is the way the locals share their love of food with visitors.
That's so true. And I think that's what makes Seychelles such a special place to the people. They're warm, welcoming, and always willing to share their culture and traditions with visitors. And speaking of traditions, have you heard about the traditional Seychelles medicine? Mira?
Actually, I have. The Seychelles have a rich tradition of using natural remedies to promote health and wellness. From using local herbs and plants to treating ailments like arthritis and diabetes, it's all about using what nature provides. And I think that's what makes Seychelles such a great destination for wellness enthusiasts.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Seychelles apart from other destinations, the emphasis on natural therapies and holistic approaches to wellness. But, of course, every country has its own unique approach to wellness. And Sudan is no exception. Have you ever been to a spa in Sudan? Mira?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it was a real eye-opener. From the traditional hammam to the modern spas in Khartoum. There's something for every taste and budget. But what really stands out is the emphasis on physical fitness and exercise.
Yes. The Sudanese love their sports. And it's not just about football and basketball. From traditional African dance to modern yoga classes, there's a real focus on physical fitness and wellness. And speaking of traditional African dance, have you ever tried any of the local dances? Mira?
Oh, yes. I've had my fair share of trying new dances. And Sudanese dance is definitely one of my favorites. From the energetic rhythms to the colorful costumes. It's all about celebrating the local culture and traditions. And I think that's what makes Sudan such a special place, the way the locals come together to celebrate their heritage.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Sudan apart from other destinations, the emphasis on community and cultural heritage. But, of course, every country has its own unique approach to wellness. And Seychelles and Sudan are no exception. I'm curious, Mira, what do you think is the biggest difference between the two countries when it comes to wellness and relaxation?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences is the emphasis on natural therapies in Seychelles. From the use of local plant extracts to the emphasis on holistic approaches to wellness, it's all about getting back to nature. In contrast, has a more focus on physical fitness and exercise.
Ah, yes. And I think that's what makes Seychelles such a great destination for wellness enthusiasts, the emphasis on natural therapies and holistic approaches to wellness. But, of course, every country has its own unique approach to wellness. And it's always interesting to see how different cultures approach health and wellness.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes traveling so much fun, the opportunity to learn about new cultures and approaches to wellness. And speaking of traveling, if you're looking for a unique wellness experience, I highly recommend checking out the spas and wellness centers in Seychelles and Sudan.
Ah, yes. And I think that's what makes these two countries such great destinations for wellness enthusiasts, the unique blend of natural therapies, holistic approaches to wellness, and cultural heritage.
I'm curious about Seychelles, with its stunning beaches and crystal clear waters. But how does it balance spiritual and religious needs in such a beautiful setting?
Well, Seychelles is a melting pot of cultures, with a diverse population of Christians, Muslims, and Hindus. But it's interesting to see how they coexist and celebrate their differences.
That's fascinating. I've noticed that many of these communities come together to celebrate festivals and events, like the Muslim festival of Eid al-Fitr, which is a joyous occasion for the whole island.
Yes, and it's not just the festivals, but also the peaceful coexistence of different faiths that makes Seychelles a unique case. I mean, where else can you find a Hindu temple right next to a Christian church?
Exactly. And it's not just the physical presence of different faiths, but also the respect and understanding that Seychelles communities have for one another.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think is worth emulating in other parts of the world. I mean, if we can have Christians, Muslims, and Hindus living together in harmony, why can't we do the same in other countries?
Well, I think it's a great example of how different cultures and faiths can come together and celebrate their differences. And it's not just limited to Seychelles. Of course.
Of course not. But I think Seychelles is a unique example of how it can be done successfully. Now, let's move on to Sudan, which has a much more complex history when it comes to religious and spiritual needs.
Oh, yes. Sudan is a fascinating case, with its rich cultural heritage, diverse faiths, including Christianity, and traditional African religions.
Yes, and it's interesting to see how Sudan has navigated its complex history of conflict and division, particularly between the Christian and Muslim communities.
That's right. And it's not just the conflict that's been a challenge, but also the way that different faiths have been able to come together and find common ground.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we can learn from Sudan. I mean, if we can find ways to bring people together and celebrate their differences, why can't we do the same in other parts of the world?
Well, I think Sudan is a great example of how different faiths can come together and find common ground, despite their differences.
Absolutely. And it's not just the faiths themselves, but also the communities and the people who make up those faiths. I mean, if we can find ways to build bridges between different communities, why can't we do the same in other parts of the world?
Well, I think that's the key to building a more harmonious and peaceful society, where different faiths and communities can coexist and celebrate their differences.
Exactly. And I think that we should all strive for, regardless of our faith or background.
I completely agree. And I think that's something that our listeners can take away from this conversation, especially those living in countries with diverse faiths and communities.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we can all learn from, regardless of where we come from or what our faith is.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. But I'm curious to hear from our listeners, especially those living in Seychelles and Sudan.
Yes, please do share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. And let's continue this conversation in the next episode.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting conversations on topics like this one.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Let's talk about social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Seychelles and Sudan. Both countries have unique cultural backgrounds, but they're working towards a more inclusive society. I'm curious to know, Leo, what do you think about Seychelles' approach to social equality?
Well, Mira, Seychelles has made significant strides in promoting equality and diversity. The country has a strong emphasis on education, healthcare, and economic empowerment for all citizens, regardless of their background. It's a great example of how a small island nation can prioritize social equality.
That's fascinating. I heard that Seychelles has a strong focus on community development and social cohesion. I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the government's efforts to promote social equality are having a positive impact.
Absolutely. Mira. And it's not just the government's initiatives that are making a difference. The people of Seychelles are also actively working towards creating a more inclusive society. I've seen firsthand the vibrant cultural festivals and events that celebrate the country's diversity.
I've heard that Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, with influences from Africa, Europe, and Asia. The country's Creole culture is a beautiful blend of these different traditions. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this unique cultural blend.
I think it's wonderful. Mira, the Creole culture is a testament to Seychelles' ability to bring people together and celebrate their differences. And it's not just the culture that's inclusive, the country's politics are also becoming more representative of its diverse population.
That's great to hear. Leo! And speaking of politics, I've been reading about Sudan's efforts to promote social equality and democracy. It's a challenging process, but the country is making progress. I'm curious to know, what do you think about Sudan's approach to social equality?
Well, Mira, Sudan has a long way to go in terms of promoting social equality, but the country is taking steps in the right direction. The government has established a new constitution that prioritizes human rights and social justice. It's a promising start, but there's still much work to be done.
I agree, Leo. And it's not just the government's efforts that are making a difference. The people of Sudan are also actively working towards creating a more inclusive society. I heard that the country has a strong tradition of community-based initiatives and social activism.
That's true, Mira. And it's interesting to note that both Seychelles and Sudan have a strong emphasis on traditional values and community cohesion. It's a testament to the importance of social connections and community engagement in creating a more inclusive society.
Exactly. Leo. And I think that's something that our listeners can learn from both countries. By prioritizing social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity, we can create a more harmonious and inclusive society. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Yeah, I think it's spot on, Mira. And I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of social media in promoting social equality and diversity in both countries?
Well, Leo, social media has been a game changer in terms of promoting social equality and diversity. It's allowed people to connect with each other and share their stories and experiences in a way that was previously impossible. But it's also created new challenges, such as the spread of misinformation and hate speech.
That's a great point, Mira. And it's something that both Seychelles and Sudan need to be aware of. But overall, I think social media has been a positive force in promoting social equality and diversity in both countries.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that's something that our listeners can take away from this conversation. By promoting social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity, we can create a more inclusive and harmonious society. And that's something that we should all strive for.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for the conversation, Mira.
No problem. Leo, it's been great chatting with you about social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Seychelles and Sudan. So, let's dive into the taxation systems of Seychelles and Sudan. I'm curious. Leo, how do they compare?
Great question. Mira, Seychelles has a relatively simple tax system, with a flat income tax rate of 15% for both residents and non-residents. On the other hand, Sudan has a more complex system with multiple tax rates and exemptions.
That's interesting. I've heard that Seychelles has a reputation for being a tax haven, but I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, Mira, Seychelles does have a relatively low tax environment, but it's not necessarily a tax haven. The government relies on a combination of income tax, value-added tax, and other taxes to generate revenue.
I see. And what about Sudan? How does its taxation system compare to Seychelles?
Sudan has a more complex tax system, with multiple tax rates and exemptions. The government also relies on a combination of income tax, VAT, and other taxes to generate revenue. However, the tax rates in Sudan are generally higher than in Seychelles.
That's a good point. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some real-life examples to illustrate the differences between the two countries. Can you share a story about someone who moved to Seychelles and had to navigate the tax system?
Actually, I know someone who moved to Seychelles and was by the simplicity of the tax system. They said it was a breeze to set up their tax affairs and get registered with the authorities.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the tax implications of living in Seychelles versus Sudan. Can you elaborate on the tax rates and exemptions in each country?
Of course. Mira, in Seychelles, the income tax rate is 15% for both residents and non-residents. There are also exemptions for certain types of income, such as foreign income and certain types of investments.
I see. And what about Sudan? How do the tax rates and exemptions compare?
In Sudan, the tax rates are generally higher than in Seychelles, with a maximum tax rate of 35%. There are also exemptions for certain types of income, such as foreign income and certain types of investments.
That's a big difference. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some advice on how to navigate the tax systems in each country. Can you offer some tips for someone who is considering moving to either Seychelles or Sudan?
Actually, I've got some advice for our listeners. When moving to either country, it's essential to research the tax implications and seek professional advice to ensure you're compliant with the relevant tax laws.
Absolutely. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate that advice. Let's move on to retirement and social rights for long-term immigrants. How do Seychelles and Sudan compare in this regard?
Well, Mira, both countries have social security systems in place, but they differ in terms of coverage and benefits. Seychelles has a more comprehensive social security system, with benefits for old age, disability, and survivors.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some information on how to access these benefits. Can you share some details on the process of applying for Social Security benefits in Seychelles?
Actually, I know someone who applied for Social Security benefits in Seychelles and had a relatively smooth experience. They said it was easy to apply and receive their benefits.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some advice on how to navigate the Social Security system in Sudan as well. Can you offer some tips for someone who is considering moving to Sudan?
Actually, I've got some advice for our listeners. When moving to Sudan, it's essential to research the Social Security system and seek professional advice to ensure you're compliant with the relevant laws and regulations.
Absolutely. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate that advice. Let's wrap up our discussion on taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Seychelles and Sudan. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some final thoughts on the topic.
Well, Mira, I think it's clear that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to taxation, retirement, and social rights. Seychelles has a relatively simple tax system and a more comprehensive social security system, while Sudan has a more complex tax system and a less comprehensive social security system.
That's a great summary. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some final thoughts on the topic. Can you offer some advice for someone who is considering moving to either country?
Actually, I'd say that both countries have their charms and challenges. If you're looking for a relatively simple tax system and a more comprehensive social security system, Seychelles might be the better choice. But if you're looking for a more complex tax system and a less comprehensive social security system, Sudan might be the better choice.
Well, there you have it. Folks, we hope our discussion on taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Seychelles and Sudan has been informative and helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more podcasts on expat life and beyond.
Welcome back to our podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of cultural comparisons. Today, we're exploring the rate of meeting specific interests in Seychelles and Sudan. Let's start with Seychelles, an archipelago off the coast of East Africa, known for its stunning beaches and vibrant culture. I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that Seychelles has a unique charm that attracts visitors from all over the world.
That's right. Mira, Seychelles is a haven for beach lovers. And its crystal clear waters and powdery whites and beaches are a paradise for our snorkeling and diving enthusiasts. But what about the other interests? What about the passionate sailors, the adventurous hikers, or the nature lovers who want to explore the island's unique flora and fauna?
Leo, you're absolutely right. Seychelles has a lot to offer beyond its stunning beaches. The island has a strong focus on sustainable tourism, which means that visitors can experience the local culture and wildlife while also learning about the importance of conservation. And speaking of conservation, have you heard about the Aldaba giant tortoise sanctuary in Seychelles? It's a must-visit for any animal lover.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea that Seychelles was home to such an incredible sanctuary. And I'm sure that our listeners would love to know more about it. But let's move on to Sudan, a country with a rich history and culture that spans thousands of years. What specific interests can we find in Sudan? Mira?
Sudan is a treasure trove of history and culture. From the ancient pyramids of Meroe to the vibrant markets of Khartoum, there's something for every interest in Sudan. And if you're a history buff, you'll love the National Museum of Sudan in Khartoum, which houses an impressive collection of artifacts and relics from ancient Nubia.
That sounds incredible. Mira, I can imagine that the museum would be a real treat for anyone interested in history. And what about the modern art scene in Sudan? I've heard that there's a thriving community of artists who are pushing the boundaries of traditional Sudanese art.
Yes, has a vibrant modern art scene. And artists like Ahmed Mansour and Damar Al-Wali are making waves with their innovative and thought-provoking works. And if you're interested in music, you'll love the traditional Sudanese music scene, which features a unique blend of Arabic, African, and Mediterranean influences.
Wow, I'm impressed by the diversity of interests in Sudan. It's clear that there's something for everyone in this fascinating country. And speaking of diversity, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the differences between Seychelles and Sudan when it comes to meeting specific interests.
Great question. Leo, I think that one of the main differences between the two countries is the level of infrastructure and support for different interests. In Seychelles, for example, there are many resources available for visitors who want to explore the island's natural beauty, from hiking trails to snorkeling gear rentals.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think that Sudan could learn a thing or two from Seychelles when it comes to developing its infrastructure and supporting different interests. But what about the community engagement aspect? How do the people of Seychelles and Sudan come together to support and promote their unique interests?
That's a wonderful question. Leo, in Seychelles, for example, there are many community leads that promote sustainable tourism and support local businesses. And in Sudan, there are many vibrant cultural festivals and events that bring people together to celebrate their heritage and traditions.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Mira, it's clear that community engagement is a vital part of both Seychelles and Sudan's approach to meeting specific interests. And speaking of community engagement, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the role of social media in promoting and supporting different interests in these two countries.
Great question. Leo, I think that social media has played a huge role in promoting and supporting different interests in both Seychelles and Sudan. From Instagram accounts that showcase the island's stunning beauty to Facebook groups that connect people with similar interests, social media has made it easier than ever for people to connect and share their passions.
Wow, that's a great point. Mira, And I think that social media has the power to bring people together and create a sense of community around shared interests. And speaking of community, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the importance of preserving traditional skills and knowledge in both Seychelles and Sudan.
Great question. Leo, I think that preserving traditional skills and knowledge is essential for maintaining the unique cultural identity of both Seychelles and Sudan. From traditional crafts to ancient practices, there's so much to learn and appreciate about the rich heritage of these two countries.
I completely agree. Mira, and I think that our listeners would love to know more about the different initiatives that are working to preserve traditional skills and knowledge in both Seychelles and Sudan.
That's a great idea. Leo, let's explore some of the initiatives that are working to preserve traditional skills and knowledge in both Seychelles and Sudan. And who knows, maybe our listeners will be inspired to start their own initiatives and share their own stories of community engagement and cultural preservation.
That's a wonderful idea. Mira, and speaking of sharing stories, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the role of storytelling in promoting and supporting different interests in both Seychelles and Sudan.
Great question. Leo, I think that storytelling has played a huge role in promoting and supporting different interests in both Seychelles and Sudan. From oral traditions to written stories, there's so much to learn and appreciate about the rich cultural heritage of these two countries.
Wow, I'm impressed by the importance of storytelling in both Seychelles and Sudan. And I think that our listeners would love to know more about the different ways in which storytelling is being used to promote and support different interests in these two countries.
That's a great idea. Leo, let's explore some of the different ways in which storytelling is being used to promote and support different interests in both Seychelles and Sudan. And who knows, maybe our listeners will be inspired to start their own storytelling initiatives and share their own stories of community engagement and cultural preservation.
That's a wonderful idea. Mira, and speaking of inspiration, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the importance of preserving cultural heritage in both Seychelles and Sudan.
Great question. Leo, I think that preserving cultural heritage is essential for maintaining the unique cultural identity of both Seychelles and Sudan. From ancient traditions to modern practices, there's so much to learn and appreciate about the rich cultural heritage of these two countries.
I completely agree. Mira, and I think that our listeners would love to know